Hello, everybody. Welcome to Lorebeards and Roleplaying.
Hey,
Oh, hi. Hello, as we say on the other channels.
welcome.
Vera, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Vera. Vera Samilla. I am a thing maker. I'm an online creature. Wow, whoa. I'm also one of the writers for Warhammer. I work on the tabletop RPGs. I'm on the new Sylvania book. Excellent stuff there. Super excited. I've done a lot of writing for 4th edition, some for the Old World, some for Age of Sigmar. Hi, hello.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here. I am Ross Watson. I am a game designer and author. I've written over 100 different role-playing game products. Some of the highlight reel worthy entries are most of the Warhammer 40k role-playing game line, Star Wars Edge of the Empire, Torg Eternity, and Savage Worlds Rifts. And today, our topic is going to be about species and morality in tabletop role-playing games. That's a big topic.
Yeah, but it's one that's defined in some way. I think every edition of D&D. It's one that has evolved over the history of RPGs as a broad form of thing doing. It's one that is constantly relevant during character creation, during plotting out one's campaigns, during setting design, and it is sort of a background question that is relevant to the background of a game, right?
Yeah, I mean, it involves world building, but it also involves like how players approach morality sometimes in your game. So I think that it's valuable both for the game masters who are the ones doing the world building and also the players who are the ones going to have to be exploring that world. What are some things you'd want to start out with?
Well, we're about to get really technical because we have to define what we mean. We have to really be specific here, I would say, because there are a lot of different ways to view this subject. And I think that defining what we mean will make it easier for us to have a meaningful and productive conversation about it.
100% agree. So species and morality, what's the first step we need to talk about? The moral essentialism, perhaps?
I think we're going ahead a little bit there.
Okay, fair enough.
Let's start with like species itself, because that is the term used in the most recent version D&D, right? 2024 on. It's species rather than race.
Mm-hmm. And species is a thing that's important in almost every role-playing game, although it becomes, I would argue, maybe even more important when you're dealing with fantasy as a genre. It does come up occasionally in things like cyberpunk or sci-fi, but most of the time when you're talking about species and talking about morality, what you're looking at are fantasy settings typically.
Yes, and as we're defining like more recently, the idea of like species versus race are quite different because race are like differences within a species, right? We have this in humanity, and then in species, differences are more like broadly, even like it's more to do with like broad variations in genetics, like whether or not it's possible to reproduce together, completely dramatic biological shifts like dark vision or mandibles or wings, right?
Right. Like the fact that dogs are canids in our
Yes.
world and bears are ursids, but they actually share a whole lot of characteristics between them, even though they're two different species.
Yeah, if we're getting into like the entire taxonomy, species is a taxonomic distinction, whereas I think that most of the RPG species we play would probably fall under the same, not even the same family of like humanoid creatures, because you can have like a goo-based things, you'd have like inorganic species, quote unquote. There's a lot of variation that's possible.
War robots like Warforged, for
Oh yeah.
example. Yeah. I just wanted to like get in people's minds, like when you're talking about like races of bears, you're talking about like the polar bear, the grizzly bear, black bear. Whereas the species of bear is the ursids. That's the difference between them and dogs. Well, one of the differences. Yeah, but we could get crazy with this topic, but it's interesting. I think it's important to get into because we briefly touched on this, or some of the things we're going to talk about today. We briefly touched on in our session 0 episode. So if people should probably be ready to go watch that one again after this.
Yeah, because this again ties into the way that your setting operates in the background. This is part of the big ideas of your tone, of your character building process, of your expectations as a player and as a game master.
That's right.
Because there are pretty dramatic differences when you have ontological evil as part of the nature of a species, right?
I love that you use words like ontological evil. I think that's just so great.
Well, like I said, we're going to be doing a lot of definitions today because we have to be very precise here because we are in a realm that can be kind of tricky.
Right. And it's going to get more tricky as we go on because there's, the classic Tolkien species, but there's also, I mean, we definitely want to talk about like how undead are perceived and things like that.
Yep.
So where would you like to begin?
Let's begin by defining ontology.
Yay! Ontology. What does ontology mean?
So, ontology is the study of the fundamental nature of existence. It is essentialism. It is an absolute quality that is true and absolute. It is just like an essential thing. So, when I say something is ontologically good, it is essentially and absolutely good. It is a true good. This is used in like discussion of religion a lot, right? And in this case, one of the ideas is that in early editions of D&D in particular, for example, there were species of creature, varieties of creature that were ontologically evil. And we have this by the magical the statistic of alignment.
Oh, our favorite, not favorite thing.
Which was, in fact, assigned wholesale to certain varieties of critter.
Yeah, different editions of Dungeons and Dragons treated this differently. Sometimes they would have like a percent based, like how many that a culture has this percentage that is this alignment and this percentage that's that alignment. But it is also, I think you can squarely point the finger at Dungeons and Dragons as the one who started this whole thing. When you go look at the monster manual and you look down at the orc and look at its alignment.
Yeah, because like wargaming, which sort of predates D&D, was about more realistic war scenarios where the morality is sometimes a little messier, sometimes it's not, depending on the war. But those are, as we understand, like meant to be real people, like human people who are complicated and harder to essentialize in many cases, right?
We've got a super chat from Syndicalist Swallower. What a great name. Syndicalist Wallower. Excuse me, not Swallower, Wallower.
Wait, welcome in. Hi.
Would you like to read this one?
Yeah. First time catching his stream. Recently started a Traveler game. Very cool. All Varga crew, and yes, half were pirates. But yes, alignment is weird. Well, congratulations on the new game. Awesome stuff. I hope you have an awesome time.
Oh, we've got to cover Traveler.
Yeah. Oh, we will. But yes, you're right. Alignment is weird. And in some ways, we're going to touch on the nature of alignment today because it is part of what framed, especially the early editions of D&D and how different races at the time, now species, were described and portrayed.
Absolutely. And this is the part of the show where I say we are definitely appreciative of all super chats because super chats are the absolute best way to support the channel, support the hosts, and keep more content coming your way. So if you enjoy Lorebeards and role-playing, you can keep it going with more super chats. We're always grateful to anybody who supports us this way. All right, so back to the discussion. And we were talking about Dungeons & Dragons. We were talking about ontological evil. We were talking about how orcs in the monster manual are always evil, or at least that's how they have been portrayed for almost 50 years.
Yeah, because there was this amazing little book that came out that taught you to play the game, where it determined whether a given fantasy race was a playable class or an enemy type. And that was sort of the start here, right?
Well, I mean, I think at its fundamental level, role-playing games, if you focus on the game part, rather than the role-playing part, require antagonists. They require things for your players to encounter and to get into conflict with, typically violent conflict, but not always. And that this was just kind of a natural growth of that necessity. But I think it's obvious nowadays, looking back, that there wasn't a lot of thought put into it. I think probably the best way.
Yeah, I think that it was thought of in the sense of what are some spooky things we can draw and have attack people in dungeons, and that was the idea, was to enable the style of gameplay that was rooted in collecting coin, in amassing wealth and power, and having obstacles to fight, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that was about as deep as it went.
Yeah, it's certainly early on. Yeah, absolutely.
But
fortunately, we did have a fairly big sea change in the 90s where we started thinking about these things a lot more differently. But yeah, through the 70s and 80s, it was very much like, we need bad guys. Here's a bunch of bad guys. And they're always bad because
the bad guys.
You didn't think about it.
Well, you need bad guys, right?
Sure.
I mean, arguably you don't, but most stories kind of benefit from that, and it is harder to frame a gray villain like myself than it is to put together a list of creatures that will come and get you. And this shift did happen like around the time the Forgotten Realms gained popularity. We talked about this during our show on the Forgotten Realms and their development, and that sort of led into this, but I think it's accurate to say that that marked a beginning to this movement of adding a little more depth to these villains, right?
Absolutely. Prior to the Forgotten Realms being a big thing, I can tell you, as a man of a certain age, we played a lot of Dungeons & Dragons in my youth, in high school, in college, and the majority of that play, when it was not deeply story driven, had pitfalls where we would encounter things like, hey, there's some orcs that we fought and some of them survived. Do we take them captive? Do we not? Hey, look, here's an orc stronghold. There's got to be women and children inside. How are we going to handle that when every single one of them is worth XP?
Yeah, because I think to some extent these questions of morality come up pretty naturally in play. Like, even in a setting where you're told, okay, all of these creatures are evil, there's also the suggestion of culture, right? And that begins to raise certain questions at the table during play.
I think there's another. I want to diverge just briefly because there's a whole episode. There's a whole episode we could do on paladins and paladin oaths and alignment. But I just want to really quick, hook it back into what we're talking about. Is that often one of the ontological moral issues in the Dungeons & Dragons game came from parties that had paladins in them, because paladins had a very strict code, which was later codified, but originally was just like, hey, you have to be lawful good. So there were many, many, many arguments I remember having as a young man, either as a game master or as a player, regarding what would be appropriate for a paladin to do in situations. So it is sometimes on the player side. That's the only thing I want to bring up, and then go back.
Yeah,
back to you.
No, you're right though, because this is a matter of goodness, right? Like paladins are on a quest to destroy evil, and all of these creatures are evil. But what is the good act? It gets very messy very fast, and when you
what is the quality of mercy? So many Star Trek shows have gone through this exact issue, this exact quandary. But please,
it turns out that deciding arbitrarily that an entire species pings as evil when you detect evil does not simplify this in some cases.
Again, I will reference reference Order of the Stick, where a character, their halfling rogue will walk around with a 1-inch thick lead sheet just because that's part of his culture. Don't question it. Don't look into it too hard. Because detect evil used to be blocked by 1-inch thick of lead. That's a joke about that. Anyway, so yes, you were saying that there are ways that campaigns can look differently, and the first one to do so was the Forgotten Realms, and what maybe we should touch on what part of that in particular you're thinking of.
Just the way that it invited more of this development of the world as an existing thing, and it wanted to explore, I would say, grayer shades of morality. You had criminal groups you could interact with more nicely. You had distant cultures that had remnants that still existed that were disenfranchised and frustrated. There's just a lot more depth to the setting that invited moral quandary, and I think this accompanied a move toward more playable varieties of creature and character creation, right?
And this is where we talk about Drizzt Do'Urden being the very first good or non-evil, I should say, drow, and how that was kind of a major milestone in thinking of species not as monolithic monocultures, but instead groups that have lots of outliers of gray areas and Venn diagram overlaps about what they think and how they act and how they behave.
Yeah. Like, drow society is meant to be this matriarchal, sadistic, spider-aligned mess where there's absolute power and all sorts of tiers of slavery, and it's all very evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Drizzt sort of asked the question, well, what about someone who doesn't really benefit from this matriarchal power structure who winds up existing outside of it? And the answer is maybe their morality is a little bit more complicated, right?
Yes, that is, I think, the ultimate point we're trying to make here is that morality is not a simple black and white thing. Almost never, in fact.
Which is complicated by D&D's existence that it is via the alignment system. Oh, we got a super chat from Syndicalist here.
Oops. Sorry, Syndicalist Swallower. I've always used paladins as they serve their god's morality. War god morality and love god morality can have many phases. It helps that I study polytheism. I mean, yes, and paladins have come an awful long way from their very strict hidebound portrayals in the early editions of Dungeons & Dragons. And starting with 3rd edition, you could actually have non-good paladins and even paladins who didn't worship gods at all. That was early 2000s, so it's been 25 years-ish of paladins not having to be good. So.
Yeah, and I would say that like the more modern scene of specific oaths is quite useful for this because it expresses a different idea about what goodness is that is more character specific. Definitely, though, having individual tenets of a god be what defines a paladin is a pretty mature way to handle this, I feel. Like, we do it this way in Warhammer 4th Edition, where there are specific tenets of a given god that you must adhere to be a priest of them in some way, to access their miracles and blessings. You have to walk the walk, right?
Like I said, I think we could do a whole episode just on paladins, frankly. They've been such a major thing, so.
I like it. We should.
Yeah, they've ended campaigns, paladins have. Trips. The strict nature of paladins has caused, I think, more arguments than just about any other thing in Dungeons & Dragons. But getting back to
the whole thing, right?
Well, yeah, like interpretations of what does lawful good mean, what does the role of paladin mean? That's a whole episode. But I think today, like I brought it up just to mention that it is sometimes on the player side. There's other examples of this from Vampire the Masquerade I'd like to talk about too.
Oh yeah.
But I think where you're starting from is a place of the world building and the lore of the setting, as we just started with Forgotten Realms, and now we're talking about how game masters sort of portray that in the setting, because it is shades of gray, and there's a lot of. I mean, I know as a game master myself, when I run Dungeons & Dragons, I always wonder in the back of my head when I'm designing an encounter, what happens if the player characters decide to take some of these guys captive? Suddenly a fun part of the adventure that I can move on from within 30 minutes becomes something that I cannot move on from at all. And instead we have to sit here and like, okay, well, what are you going to do with the prisoners? How are you going to question them? How are you going to secure them, et cetera, et cetera. And that is part of like adventurer morality. Like, what do we do with people we capture as opposed to kill? And like we were saying earlier, in early editions of Dungeons and Dragons, all monsters, period, even women and children, were worth XP, and so there were a lot of arguments about like, well, we should just track them back to their lair and then kill all their women and children.
Yeah, like this is all subjective stuff too. Like, does massacring this entire village make us bad people, even though they're evil creatures? I mean, maybe it depends on the GM. I don't know.
Right, the murder hobo aspect. A couple of great super chats here. Necroplayer, thank you, Necroplayer. My biggest issue with making evil, actually, let me do my finger quotes, evil monsters as player characters is that wizards often leaned on whitewashing a large group of them to be more tasteful or worse, making PCs one of the good ones. Woo! I think he's saying Wizards of the Coast, not wizards as a class.
Yeah, I would presume. Although the idea of a level 20 wizard orchestrating such things is...
I mean, Elminster could do it.
I hope he wouldn't. My God.
Here's a great one. Why don't you read this one?
Yeah, Pumpkin Historian, thank you so much. In regards to Drow society, is somewhat problematic that an entire matriarchal society is portrayed as evil and cruel. Yeah, I mean, there is a distinct like dominatrix aesthetic they're meant to have. There's whips and chains and spider silk bodysuits that are meant to bring across a certain evil queen vibe that I believe is meant more to titillate than to investigate an alternative structure, right? It's not meant to be like some form of interrogation of like how matriarchy functions, right? I think that it's another example of an aesthetic being brought forward to kind of titillate and intrigue that does not stand up to super close scrutiny in a way that allows for more, let's say, gray world building.
It's worth pointing out that in Baldur's Gate 2, the Drow Viconia, who is a evil priestess, her character art was designed after a supermodel. And she is intentionally one of your romance options. Partially because I think the way that Drow society was portrayed. Let's just put it that way.
Well, like, you have, like, sexy evil, like the Drow, and then you have, like, chaotic, brutish evil, like gnolls and stuff, right?
I think you could argue succubi also fall into the sexy evil side, but...
I think that's a good pull.
But yeah, I mean, demons and devils. So, like, I mean, let's just talk about briefly, like, what is ontological evil in Dungeons and Dragons? Okay, sometimes it's a entire culture. Sometimes it's the Drow and the Orcs, where there's reasons, but it feels very forced and ham-handed to say that they're always evil. Then you got like for lack of a better word, angels, the celestial creatures versus the demonics or the demonics and the devils, right? The devil and the demons, those are both ontologically evil, whereas the celestials are ontologically good. And this obviously all flows from that great thing that you and I just love to death, which is alignments.
Yeah, ontological evil is defined by a little box ending in E on your character sheet.
Basically.
And the part of the challenge here is that certain creatures are made of evil stuff. Like, they're literally comprised of like the plane of evil badness.
The undead typically fall into this category.
Yeah, but they're animated by negative stuff, and we'll talk about that soon. But in other cases is that they culturally are evil aligned, like Grumsh, orcs, the god of bad vibes and violence, just defines their society, so they're inherently evil because of that.
Well, that is definitely something Dungeons & Dragons leaned on heavily, was the idea like, well, they worship an evil god, therefore, yeah. and it was a way of washing their hands in the situation that, looking back now, feels clumsy and very shallow, I think.
Because it begs the question, what if they choose to not do that?
Precisely. And what was even stranger was that once you get into once you get a second edition, you get the kits and things like that. Some of the gods didn't. They started to branch out their alignment pretty significantly, which I remember thinking like, well, hey, if I can play a lawful neutral cleric of Malar the Beast Lord, who by the way is an evil god in Forgotten Realms, but he allows lawful neutral clerics, so how bad could it be, right? It just sometimes the rules make you really wonder. We have a super chat from Gary Garionson. Would you like to read this one?
Yes, thank you so much, Gary. Do you know the Malazan series by Erickson/Esselmont? I am loosely familiar. I understand that it is one of these fantasy series that is sort of born from campaign settings, and that it is really well constructed. I believe that one of the writers is an anthropologist, and that it is intended to really interrogate this kind of stuff that we're discussing now, like how different relationships happen over time between societies and cultures, what is good and what is not. But I have not read them.
It's 10 books long. I would like to read it. It sounds pretty cool. I have not. I am familiar with it on a surface level, like Vera. That's about it. Okay, so where would we? So this is basically what we're talking about when we talk about moral essentialism, right? Is the idea that some species are always evil, some are always good.
Yeah, and then we get into the era of half orcs.
Yes. That would be. This would. Half orcs were a thing in first and second edition, although they were not in the core. Well, they were in the core Advanced Dungeons & Dragons manual, I believe, when they first started. But they got highlighted certainly in third edition and moving forward.
Yeah, as a playable species, right?
Mm-hmm.
Prior to when orcs themselves were.
Yeah, orcs themselves being a playable race, that didn't really happen until third edition. And that was not even at the start of third edition. That would have been probably 2002-ish, where orcs were playable as a actual orc.
And this raises like all sorts of questions.
I mean, yeah, and it was also very well. The half-breed races were always considered. You had to explain how this would happen, and it was very rarely a romantic story of two people falling in love. Very rarely.
There's the potential for like star-crossed lovers, and I think some of the narratives were meant to deal with having trouble fitting into either culture. But that's just then there are two cultures to fit into, and it starts to beg lots of questions.
Right. Canis Half-Elven dealt with a lot of those issues in the Dragonlance series, for example. And we actually have a really good comment here from, oops, sorry, wrong one. Yupe Rantalainen. Hey, our good friend who talked to us about Nordic LARP. He says, how about Aethys? There's a setting with a lot of species that are not evil, but still racist and not so nice. Yeah, the Dark Sun setting, which is Aethys, did present more nuanced views, to the point where like the halflings, which had prior almost always been considered like on the side of good, were like these nasty little cannibals in Aethys. Dark Sun flipped the scripts pretty hard on a lot of stuff. So,
well, bringing up the idea of like halflings being ontologically good. I think there was a gradual move to introducing grayer morality in general, because players could have different forms of morality after a while, right? You could be theoretically an evil player character at one point. And this was sort of extended to accept grayer possibilities for NPCs and so on.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the story of species and morality is the story of the alignment system itself. It started out as a very basic choice between three options: law, neutrality, and chaos. That was the early starter box, and then we got when Advanced Dungeons & Dragons came along, we got the 9, where there's 3 flavors of good, evil, and neutrality, including a true neutrality right at the center. And one of the things I've often pointed out, like some of the the media that I like to point to is things that really support Dungeons and Dragons or fantasy role playing in general. Sometimes is to say, hey, that was like a really great example of a lawful neutral or a true neutral or what have you. Record of Lotus War has got one of my favorite examples of a true neutral character, which would be Carla. Anybody who's watched Record of Lotus War probably knows what that means, but otherwise go look it up. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's I think a natural thing that as more interest was put into fleshing out the depths of individual cultures and treating them as cultures, that you saw more complexity arise within those, right?
Yeah, because you don't want to have a fixed moral value based on birth. You want to have, because that is obviously echoing some very uncomfortable real world parallels to racism and oppression of different peoples. So instead, the drive became to frame the differences between species in terms of their culture and their history and their material conditions, that is to say, their religion, their politics, their environment. And that is how you shape an outlook rather than innate virtue or lack of it.
Yeah, and you get into questions that way that are also complicated, like cultural relativism, the idea that basing what is good and evil on your own sensibilities culturally is questionable, or is it like where do you draw the line there? And these are discussions like still had in circles relating to like anthropology, sociology, and so on.
Right, and the core of a role-playing game is that the player, I should say, is expected to have agency with their player character. They're expected to be able to decide what they are and how they frame their own journey in terms of heroism or villainy or ambiguity. And that freedom to choose how you want your character to be represented in the tabletop is what has led to a lot of these changes. It's not really, I would argue, it's not so much like cultural pressure or anything that has made role-playing games become more aware of these differences. It's actually player options. They want to give people the choice to do something different and interesting and cool. And I would point to like one of my best examples of this. Drizzt is obviously the most well-known. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. But when I was playing Planescape Torment, which is a fantastic computer role-playing game based on Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you are a character who is in the city of Sigil, which is connected to a lot of different planes, and you encounter a succubus whose name is Fall from Grace, and she's voiced by Jennifer Hale, the amazing and mighty Jennifer Hale. And Fall from Grace is a really interesting character because Fall from Grace is not evil, whereas all the succubi previous to that moment were all evil all the time. And it was kind of a really, to me, that was like a, oh, hey, interesting, moment when I was playing that game.
Yeah, exceptions exist in like certain earlier games and drafts where you can see deliberate interrogations of this what if question, right? But then those raise further questions. Like after a point, you start to feel that any creature with sufficient intelligence should be able to shape its own morality given the chance.
I mean, the fact of sapience itself sort of suggests that they're not locked in.
But then you get into the realm of devil's advocacy, which is that it starts to be kind of hard on your players when every thinking thing they fight is a potentially virtuous, potentially redeemable creature, and it starts to make like all the violence really ugly.
It certainly can be an impact on that. I mean, one of the things we would say when we played a lot of Shadowrun, in Shadowrun, most of the time your antagonists are, guys who work for mega corporations, security guards, etc. And often one of the moral quandaries in a Shadowrun game is like, hey, this guy's just doing his job. Do we need to murder him to accomplish our goal? but I think there are. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a stumbling block. It can be something that slows down the progression of your encounters. You know, from really cool encounter to really cool encounter to role playing encounter to a combat encounter. And like I said, you know, with the idea of like, hey, maybe they captured this guy. What does that mean? Like, there's it does add complexity to what had been a previously fairly simple situation.
Yeah, and like this happens in fantasy settings also. Like there's plenty of room for let's say that there's a Knoll village that's like raiding the larders, and they're pulling off cows and massacring them, and it's causing starvation or poverty in a nearby township, and you're there to solve the problem. You're there to fight the Knolls, and they fight back, and you kill a few, and they're starving too. And now all your players are very sad.
I mean, it can change the whole vibes of an encounter. That's true.
It shapes tone, like Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
When Tolkien's orcs are treated as victims, it gets really fucked up. Like the degree of sensitivity you treat this with shapes tone a lot, which itself kind of asks some questions, right?
Absolutely.
Here, by the way.
What?
Got some super chats here, by the way.
Oh yeah, let's pop those up. Would you like to read this one?
Yeah, Necroplayer, thank you so much. Also, as someone who isn't an artist but is deeply in love with character design, as am I vehemently despise the humanization of modern monster races. Give me back pig-faced orcs. Let PCs be weird. Yeah, so this is a phenomenon we can discuss in and of itself, wherein as part of the move to make all of these monstrous species more humanized and allow them to have greater morality and be recognized as something that can be interrogated more deeply and treated as more human, they have been made cuter. Like there are other words we could use in some cases. I think the evolutions of how goblins have been depicted over the past 30 years will be studied for centuries. But there is a definite shift, right? And that accompanies this idea of maybe this is a playable character, maybe there's like a space I can inhabit with its own culture, maybe there's like the possibility for some kind of sympathy or empathy here. And it is easier for people to apply that kind of empathy if it's something's more humanoid, which is part of it. But this is also shaped by player agency, where a lot of people want the character they play to feel attractive in some way. So we apply like humanoid qualities, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's very common for role-playing games to treat the pretty races differently. Got a super chat from Syndicus Swallower, says, ugly violence. Let me tell you about Twilight 2000. Woo. Yeah, Twilight 2000 was yeah, and that whole genre of game is just a wild one to contemplate these days, especially with you know, the world as it stands today in 2026.
Yeah, I think that like military games invite ugliness more deliberately, but the more you invite this kind of moral questioning, the more like really heavy conversations the table can get. Right.
Yes. Another early change for me was actually playing the Robotech RPG, because in Robotech, which was around and very popular in the 80s, the quote-unquote bad guys are the Zentradi, which are this alien giant species that can shrink themselves down to human size if they want to. And one of the main characters even falls in love with one of the Zentradi, who shrinks herself down, and they end up starting a family. And that is a strong message for a game where every character who's in the Robotech game is part of the military. That's something that stuck out to me as well. Here's a good one for you.
Yeah, Stephen Lucas, thank you so much for the super chat. My problem with 5e playable X Monster is they remove most of the lore and don't explain enough. You need the monster manual or old content. Yeah, like there are certain questions that are raised by this, and I would say this is like partly an effort to prevent mandatory concessions or ideas for this, like to allow players to define themselves a little more deeply, but it also can feel too broad. Like art more broadly benefits from limitation. Having certain guidelines for what you can do and what is possible gives birth to creative solutions within those. And when you have an entirely blank slate to justify a quite unusual circumstance, it can be a little daunting, depending.
That seems fair. Got one from Twitch. Mornington Crescent says, do you draw a distinction between living creatures and those that are in some way magical creations, such as elementals, demons, and undead? If no, what would you want for a quote-unquote good demon in Warhammer? Woo!
Ooh.
Generally speaking, I do not draw. Well, let me rephrase. Generally speaking, I do very much draw a distinction between living creatures and those that are creations like undead and elementals and devils and demons and angels and celestials and all that. Good demon in Warhammer. Warhammer is a very specific setting, and yikes. Trying to imagine a good demon. I mean, that's a stretch. There have to be a lot of groundwork laid to create something like that.
So I'm going to make a bold statement here. There are no evil demons. There are also no good demons, and neither can there be any of either. Demons are the essence of a specific realm of conceptual space that is incompatible with reality. And as a result, they do gratuitous harm to reality by being there because they reshape it in their own image. And usually this is considered very bad by everyone involved.
Closest example to a good demon in Warhammer, I would argue, is like the Living Saints in 40k, but even they are... There's no good guys in 40k, so...
But the reason they're considered good guys is because they reshape the world into the vision of the imperial populace. And
they're pretty.
And they're pretty. Well, daemonettes are pretty, but they cause issues. But daemonettes are often the variety of daemon most inviting for this kind of discussion. Demon like certain kinds of Zinch daemons, usually not horrors, though they're cute, but cuter things often do this.
Yupe says D&D alignment versus Palladium alignment. Go. Oh my god. Palladium alignment is at least has the benefit of including a lot of examples. Like every single alignment in Palladium has many bullet points to try and like give you an idea of how it's different from the others. That I did appreciate, but they're still just yikes. They're all over, kind of wild. And here's one that I was thinking of. Starfury says Goblin Slayer, which is great anime. Has a wonderful discussion on the possibility of a good goblin, but Goblin Slayer's perspective is wholly informed by his traumatizing initiating event and his single-minded obsession. Also, that anime does a really good job of portraying goblins as a culture as very inimical to humans and human civilization, and it's kind of a get them before they get you kind of situation.
Yeah, I think that tonally it's meant to be very, very dark, and the way they invite that possibility and then deny it is part of that. And if you really interrogate things at your table, that's how your game can start to feel, because, oh boy, we sure are wiping out an entire society right now.
Yeah,
and that's heavy. Little Timmy does not enjoy this all the time. Like,
here's one from Azarias. Would you like to read this one?
Yeah, thank you so much, Azarias. Do y'all think there's any narrative value to having ontologically evil species or organizations? If so, do you have advice on constructing these species and groups in a way that makes it clear there's no icky real-world commentary behind them? So narrative value, absolutely. Like, we're talking about tonality here, and it is a lot more fun to have an absolute evil to fight against. It feels great for your characters to have an unambiguous win. right? When your glorious victory starts to feel like puppy kicking, it is a distinct vibe shift, and it will impact your narrative a great deal, right?
Absolutely. I can talk about this a little bit. I created a setting called Accursed, which is where you play as types of monsters, essentially, created by a group of evil witches, and your goal is to free the world from the domination of these evil witches. And during the creation of that game, that setting, the decision was made. My decision was that I wanted the main villains of the setting to be A, all women, and B, witches, specifically witches. Like I was going for a very Solomon Kane pulpy feel of like what the setting was, and you would be opposing unambiguously evil, ontologically evil, I guess. All witches are evil and accursed. And that was a firm decision we made, and it was I think it was kind of a good way to nail down some of that tone and that vibe of what we were going for. The second part of your question here is about how to construct species or groups in a way that makes it clear there's no icky real world commentary behind them. Well, you want to avoid dehumanizing language. You want to avoid the idea of kill on sight norms or bounties. I think is probably a good place to start there. Genocide should probably never be something that is unexamined or the default. I think it's the other two ways to go about that. Again, I have a whole setting where like the end goal would be a genocide of the witches. Getting rid of these supernaturally evil women from the setting that's what Accursed is about at the end of the day. That makes Accursed I think Accursed is a strong setting. I really like it. It's sold very well, I should point out. But do I feel particularly proud of that? Well, I like the opportunities it presents, but when you apply a lens to it, like some of the stuff we're talking about now, it can change the vibe and the tone considerably if you start diving into those real world connections and commentary. I don't know. Vera, how do you like, based on what I've described about Accursed, what would you say about that in terms of ontological evil and moral essentialism?
Well, it's a setting that I'm not like deeply familiar with, but I think it's something you can afford. Like you can have ultimately evil and terrible things that you're meant to fight against, and this can be very satisfying narratively. Like there are, I would say, a handful of ways to go about creating true evil in ways that are satisfying, and I feel like there are like using caution can be good, right?
There's actually another really good anime touchstone I would like to bring up, which is Freyren.
Yeah.
Because Freyren deals with demons who are considered ontologically evil, and the portrayal of them in that anime is actually very nuanced. It's really interesting to see how a species that is, I would say, unambiguously bad is portrayed in ways that makes you question that from time to time. And I like that.
Well, Freyren has been fiercely debated, I would say, and continues to be, because people debate even this, I would say, pretty strong and firm distinction about like how all demons are inherently fucked up and horrible, and the ones that don't act that way are doing so out of a different form of self-interest. And it is fiercely debated as to whether or not this is a valid way to view this setting, and there's like different circles of takes on this. It's quite interesting. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I would say it's like required. If you like the subject, please go watch for Freyren and see how Freyren handles demons in its setting, because it's really, really good.
Freyren is quite good also. We've used that as a little bit of inspiration for some of the Kothik material for High Elves and Warhammer. So it is an example of that was my draw for like more modern inspirations. But yes, I'm a big fan. So.
Okay, now I really want to read your Kothik work. I think that's really cool. Azure Shadow 88, thank you for the super chat. Is there any recommended / favorite reading that successfully makes a different species / culture stand out as alien, but still holding internal consistency? There is probably better, but I liked Forever War a lot. Orson Scott Card and the Ender's Game series, although Orson Scott Card is a horrible person, but his writing has a lot of this.
There's no shortcut. When you're trying to make a entire species and culture entirely separate from the human project and the history of human civilization, you have your work cut out for you, because you are trying to retrace certain elements of structure while avoiding pillaging like the canon of society, right? And there's no easy way to do this. You can base things on other forms of biology, which does happen in Ender's Game. They're pulling it from like swarm insectoid structures. This is done also to very different effect in Starship Troopers, where they have a psionic kind of insectoid hive mind structure that is used to create the villainous bugs who are just doing their best. And we see a little of that in Helldivers also, where there is an effort to create these alternatives to civilization that are in the broader canon meant to be their own like peaceful societies until super democracy gets there. But I would say there are really no shortcuts. You can start with like some different manner of thinking. Like Andy Waugh suggests taking a neurodivergence and using that as a foundation for a different point of view and using it to flesh out a non-human species in that way, to like consider how they might consider different priorities, and they go about the day like a biology of like different varieties of creature, and use that to construct how would society work. Like using good what ifs can be helpful here. What do you think, Ross?
So I'm going to go back to some of the classics: Ursula K. Le Guin and the Left Hand of Darkness, and Ian Banks and the culture books. I think are some good places to start for this specific thing. Aside from, Ender's Game, which I brought up earlier. And unlike Scott Card, those authors are actually really good people. So support them. That's what I've got to say about that.
Yeah, like research will help, and just like really interrogating it. You have to think hard. I think it's easy to distinguish from like any independent culture, but making things feel inhuman is hard because that's our frame of reference. So
it's not for nothing, but Helldivers and Starship Troopers are both satires, people. They're satires. Sometimes I meet someone and I'm like, I don't know if you get it. And it really always is like a red flag to me. I'm like, ooh, I don't know.
That's one of the scary things about the internet, is that it reveals how many people either are unable to or unwilling to like really engage with satire, engage with like certain elements of media. It's like
Agreed. All right, so we've talked about some setting stuff. We've talked about some other things for players. This would be, I think, a good time to bring up one of the major changes to how morality was looked at in role-playing games, and that would have been 1990s Vampire the Masquerade, where you are playing as a monster, and the game tried to make that have consequences.
Yeah, and VTM is specifically interested in your morality, right? And let's say that vampires are a distinct species here.
Sure, fair enough.
Because they have their own biology, they have their own reproductive system, I guess, kind of. That's sort of vampire-ish. And they have morality.
They have there was a mechanic called humanity, which was meant to represent like your connection to being human formerly and not being a monster. And the mechanics of that and the social consequences of that were intended to be played very seriously. It was meant to prompt ethical reflection. Let's put it that way. However, this did not always come across in play, and in play, the game would often, at least in my experience, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Vera, but often I find it would lean much more hard into like edgelord type play and casual cruelty because, hey, I'm a vampire, I'm a monster, humanity is a stat. It's okay if it goes up and down. Like people started to treat playing a vampire as like I'm a superhero with fangs in some ways.
Well, as we've spoken about before, power fantasy is kind of close to the heart of a lot of tabletop
Oh, yeah.
experiences, right? And it sure is enabled in Vampire the Masquerade, where you can become very cool and powerful and engage in diablerie and become the strongest, biggest boy. And it is, in many cases, an obstacle to try and hold on to your humanity when you want to do these things, because it turns out that surviving on rabbits and rodents is not great for your ambitions as a vampire.
It's also worth noting that in the 90s, Vampire the Masquerade brought a lot of women into the hobby. And if you wanted to impress girls, one of the ways you could do it was by being edgelordy and kind of ignoring some of the social norms. And I wouldn't say it was always positive attention that you would receive, but it certainly was a way to get attention.
It's a thing. It's a thing, and it's again, a lot of the systems encourage you to do like nasty things because it's easier to be a powerful vampire the worse of a person you are, which is kind of how the Camarilla exists. That's the status quo, right?
Right. They are the everything. Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole discussion on the differences between the Camarilla and the Sabbat, things like that.
I prefer Sabbat games. Hi.
Strangely enough, I do too, but it's definitely a thing where you'd have to have that conversation in that session 0. Syndicalist Wallower, would you like to read this one?
Yeah, Syndicalist, thank you so much. As someone whose intro to tabletop RPGs was Shadowrun and World of Darkness, not D&D, I'm so used to morally damaged PCs that hard alignment systems are weird to me. Yeah, like I think my first game was Call of Cthulhu, where your alignment is ranging from terrified to insane. So
That's right.
It's a very different tonal thing, though, right? Like both Shadowrun and WoD are grim games. Bad things happen. The characters are often kind of shitty people, and you're inviting that kind of narrative. D&D can be about more kinds of things, right?
Well, I think it's worth noting that, and I say this a lot. I'm sorry. It's worth noting, not for nothing. I'm going to say I've been saying that a lot today. I don't know why, but I think it is something we could discuss. Is that games that do not have alignment systems like Shadowrun and like World of Darkness tended to, and again, this is my experience, tended to emphasize grounding your ethics in your personal drives, in your relationships, rather than tying morality to your species. Like when I first started playing Vampire the Masquerade in 1990, it seemed very obvious to me that not all vampires were monsters, that only some were, and that it was very possible to play a character who was reflecting deeply upon their ethics and their morality as a vampire. Like who do I feed on? Why? When? Right?
Yep.
These were questions. Yeah, like Ventrue was my favorite clan, and Ventrue have to select a very specific type of person to feed from. So, for example.
Yeah, it's intriguing. Like, I think the idea with the humanity system is it would invite that, but again, like you said, people would go, "Well, I'm a vampire. Fuck it, I'm a different species. I'm gonna do whatever. I'm gonna just like go crazy mode and start gobbling up whatever I can do and violating the old human forbidden social norms." And the setting like wants you to ask that question. I think it'd be very compelling to have a pair of newly arisen fledgling vampires, one of whom holds on to their humanity and one of whom does not. And that's interesting. They foil each other. It creates a cool narrative thing.
Well, Shadowrun, I think, did this by more or less the relationships. Like we are a team of Shadowrunners. What do we as a group value? And most of the time, that's money. Most of the time, it's almost always money. But there can be cases where you're like, okay, this guy doesn't want to do anything about a particular issue, like. And actually, Shadowrun, of course, did cover some real world quote unquote racism with regards to how orcs were treated, for example, in the setting, as opposed to how elves were treated. I thought it was pretty good commentary, social commentary, Shadowrun. But your Shadowrunning group would tend to like focus around like what do we feel like we want to do most of all. It was a group decision that led to certain things. I think in games like Vampire, this was built into your clan and where you were aligned on the Camarilla Sabbat spectrum, things like that. The game started to do things in interesting ways to make you, as part of your character creation, just decide like, okay, what is our overall approach to being a monster or being a criminal who shoot people in the face for money, like Shadowrun.
Yeah, and a lot of the morality in Vampire was quite interestingly to me tied up in Abrahamic religiosity, which I thought was a really compelling take on morality. The way that it played into Cain and Abel and the Legend of Lilith. I thought that was quite intriguing, and it invited really cool moral interrogation from characters who had religious compulsion or like were otherwise drawn to finding meaning in that structure, because that's very much canon to the experience, you know?
We've got to do an episode of Vampire the Masquerade. We talk about it. We talk about it enough.
Another game I quite like, Eclipse Phase, has morality that very much functions like quite explicitly as you are describing in Shadowrun, where there's this character creation conceit where your character has fundamental aspects of their being that they are either for or against. You get 3. And that determines a lot of your character. You have the characters like pro-freedom, anti-capitalism, pro-violence, and they will get stoked when they get to like beat the sin out of some white collar type, right? Like they're big on this. You have a character who's like in favor of a certain faction, who is anti-violence, who's like in favor of freedom of expression. Like they might be a graffiti artist or something. Like this is like this shapes your gameplay, right? And it's more like personality based than morality based necessarily, but usually morality is part of this, like what they feel is like a good thing in the world, what they want to enable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some of the most successful role-playing game / settings are ones that communicate that the most clearly. The Eclipse Phase did a really good job of communicating that, I thought. And Shadowrun eventually got there. It fumbled around a little bit, but it definitely got to a much clearer space by the time you get to 3rd and 4th edition.
I'll note that the way Eclipse Phase handles species is quite cool, because Eclipse Phase is based on the Takeshi Kovacs novels. It's about re-sleeving in different bodies, and you can be any kind of creature you want. However, there are different species, because not only are there human egos that have been like digitized in this way, but there are also non-human uplifts from different strongly central cortex varieties of animal, like octopi, like ravens, like monkeys. There are also non-human persons that are like entirely digital, artificial intelligences that have become self-aware and are not as free as like the ominous threats, the Titans, that became like these like super clustered things that exist outside reality now, but that are fully self-aware, and they have their own beings. And the way these different varieties of origin for your ego shape like the kind of person you are quite intriguing. They're based in like instinctual impulse more than anything.
Gary Garianson asks, what do you think about grim dark fantasy? Hey, we've both worked on that.
I think we kind of like that. we are both Warhammer writers for the tabletop games.
It's true, among other things. Yeah, grimdark fantasy has a very different vibe than all the stuff we've been discussing so far. In grimdark fantasy, and I would argue that Accursed is actually grimdark adjacent, if not like slightly within that Venn diagram. But grimdark fantasy does tend to, I don't want to say gloss over moral issues, but it does tend to present far more antagonists as being ideologically pure, I guess is the way to put it. Where a lot of your antagonists are like, no, this is the way, and you need to either get with us or get out of the way of what we're attempting to do.
Yeah, and we've been talking about how treating the internal worlds of your different species as a complicated thing is tonally impactful, right? And in a grim setting, this is great because when everyone has a valid reason to hate everyone, it allows you to have a very sad, stressed out, and war-filled setting, which is kind of the goal.
Yeah, Grimdark is a very different vibe, and it does come across mostly in its morality. So that is a very specific flavor of fantasy that I think would probably require a whole other episode to get into about what makes that super different. But yeah, morality is definitely, and ethics, and those games, Grimdark games, often tend to be, exitus acta probat, the ends justify the means. So
everyone's wrong, everyone's desperate. Some of them want the same things and can't agree how to go about it.
Right. Like, and usually everyone is various degrees of wrong in a Grimdark game. Trench Crusade, great example.
Oh yeah.
But sometimes sometimes that wrong is just so damn cool. Too cool.
Also, I'm being asked if I check my DMs recently. I have a lot of DMs pending right now. I get a lot of DMs. I'm sorry, I'm a busy creature.
Someone's trying to slide in your DMs?
Possibly.
Unknown Armies was another RPG that did a pretty interesting take on the way that individual choices and consequences were more impactful to the morality of the setting rather than like your origin or species or even who you worked for necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But that's definitely an older example. That's what I barely remember. Unknown Armies. Good grief.
I'm not too familiar.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. It was a 90s era game. But yeah, flattening ethics down to a binary, this is good, this is evil, can one of the issues with that is that it actually makes your player characters engage less. They don't really think about the consequences. They just do the thing. That can be fun if you're just like casual beer and pretzels, if that's your way your group wants to run. If they want a deeper, more nuanced game, though, that's where a lot of stuff we're talking about is going to come into play. And we say this a lot on the show, but it's important to always point out there is no one true way, and even the stuff that we talk about here doesn't work for every single table.
Yeah, like I think the more nuance you invite with this, the more you inevitably have like paladin debates, right?
Well, I mean, again, that can come up if you're thinking about it in a particular way. Like if you're doing more beer and pretzels, like let's say we're going to play Paranoia, which is another older game. Paranoia has a very interesting morality in that the computer is always right and mutants are always wrong, and you happen to be a mutant who is also working for the computer in that game. So they kind of put it front and center that maybe not everything is as it seems in Paranoia. But that's part of the fun. Like, I don't want to think too deeply about it when I play Paranoia. I just want to like engage with that weird satire of the Cold War with clones and color-based security clearances. That's all I'm looking for out of Paranoia typically.
Yeah, and there's also the realm of like, hey, this is fucked up, but we don't care because it's fun. I noticed that you're wearing a Venture Tech shirt right now.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, the Venture Brothers are one of my favorite shows. Yes.
Well, there sure is ontological evil in the Venture Brothers, sort of.
I mean, I don't know. Like, where would you find the ontological evil in the Venture Brothers?
The concept that there must be a guild of calamitous intent, there must be evil, like there has to be this like essentially evil thing. And then you have like people working their day jobs as part of that, but they are part of this structure that is evil. It is just that is the gig, is you are the evil guy, right?
Well, yeah, and the way that the arching whole business works is it definitely it relies on tropes of the one group being perceived as good guys and one group being perceived as bad guys. But yeah, I think Venture Brothers does a good job of like saying, hey, it's more than that though.
Yeah, because like individually, pretty much every villain has like some element in them that's pretty cool. They're easy to get along with. They retire and they're laid back. They're active and they're laid back in the case of some of them. But the guild itself is evil. It is like cartoonishly evil because it's a cartoon and they're evil, and that
Literally,
is the essence of the thing. And like all of the heroes are terrible people, but it presents this idea that no, they are the good guys and these are the bad guys because they're part of that team. They're
and they
aligned this way.
right, and they do examine that throughout the show. Got a super chat from Syndicalist Wallower. Would you like to read this one?
Yeah, most grim time I've ever played. Twilight 2000 forced into a firefight with civilians over the only water stash in miles. Session 0 warned us, but hell.
So good that Session 0 warned you that was a possibility. But that does
imagine,
sound like
oh my god! Imagine little Timmy's first D&D game that you have to drag him into a fight over the well.
I ran a D&D game for a group of young people one time, and I was leaning very heavily into like the idea of the goblin market and the Fey wild and Fey bargains. And it was interesting to watch these kids sort of start to realize, okay, some of these Fey make like horrible deals with people, but the people make the deals, they do that on their own. They choose to do that. It's not like the Fey are forcing anyone to get into a weird deal with them. And it was an interesting way to see them engage with the idea that not all the villains were irredeemably evil, at least, certainly, and that different cultures, like the Fey culture, is just a massive difference between our world and their world, obviously. So yeah, that's one of the ways I found to bring it into a setting, bring it into a game, is to kind of expose people to things through the lens of tropes that they're already familiar with. And Twilight 2000 is a game that does that fairly well. It has a lot of tropes that we would be very familiar with, even though they might be very disturbing. Firefight with civilians just to start with is like, oh god, why?
Well, you're talking about Fae, and we're talking about morality. There's this trope, speaking of tropes, which we're also talking about, called blue and orange morality, where the spectrum of what is good and what is evil is just super detached from any conception that we typically have as people, right?
Yeah. Oh, another piece of media that explores this idea, of course, is Wreck-It Ralph.
Yeah, again, they're evil because they're the bad guys.
You are a bad guy, but not a bad guy, you know? As it says. Oh, good old Zangief.
Well, yeah, but like being essentially, basically the bad guy doesn't make them like shitty. It means they're evil. They're ontologically evil, but they are not in practice evil, which is why Bowser plays tennis a lot.
Actually, Wreck-It Ralph is a pretty good, like, a pretty good allegory for, like, you know, I want to play that. You do good orcs exist? Wreck-It Ralph says yes. You know, that kind of thing. I think it's a pretty good touchstone, honestly, for this kind of thing. Weirdly enough.
Yeah, and it's an example of treating the subject seriously in a sort of lighthearted manner. You know?
Yeah, exactly. One thing that's okay. Go ahead, please go ahead.
Oh, just there are ways to like treat this with some depth and still have a lighter tone. It just requires some caution. You have to like make it kind of goofy, and Adventure Time does a good job of this, where like Finn will like punk some guy who's just a dude, but then it's because it's that they're playing it off as a comedy. It's fine.
It's probably a good idea to talk about like why this perspective is important. And the reason why it's important, at least my answer, I'd love to hear your answer, Vera. My answer for this is there have been a lot of real world examples of people being oppressed and stereotyped for things like all of them being criminals or overbreeding or culturally degenerate. And all of those same labels have been applied to races in the fantasy games, like orcs and gnolls and goblins and kobolds. So the reason why this is important is, the people have the most fun when they, at least in my opinion, people have the most fun when they are safe, when they feel like they're safe. Role playing is inherently making yourself vulnerable. So removing some of those reminders of real world cruelty can make your table feel more safe and give people more opportunities to explore their character in ways that, well, just explore their character in general. Like that's what you want out of a role-playing game. So this is literally about making your game better, not necessarily about being the morality police.
Yeah, like it's important to create depth. It's important to create a world people feel like they're able to kind of spread their wings, and it's important to not reproduce what I would call like unpleasant structures. There's perhaps a line we can draw here to like queer coding villains in film.
Yeah.
That was the thing.
That was a thing for a long time. Yeah.
There was Orientalism for villains, like Fu Manchu.
Oh my God, yeah, that was a little bit before my time, but yeah, the 70s and a lot of that in the 70s, for example. Shang-Chi, obviously, and his villain, the Mandarin, in the Marvel comics are a good example of how that perception has changed.
Yeah, the classic Iron Man Mandarin is a rough ride. That's
ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
I much prefer Wenwu from the Shang-Chi film. Way better villain.
Well, you introduce different kinds of complexity because it is important to have villains who are in some way relatable. A lot of them, not always, but it's important to like have villains that have a little bit of depth to them, a little bit more intrigue. And I think there was a broadly more shallow take on this is the bad guy, they're evil because they're the bad guy. Here are all these unfamiliar things that mark them as unlike you, to code that they are the villain because they're not like you, so they're like okay to beat up. That was the essence of a lot of villainous depictions for a long while.
Cynical Swallower, only war, he says. Fighting chaos is fun. Secessionist, not fun. Oh, hey, that's directed right here.
Hey.
So, yeah, in Only War, which is one of the Warhammer 40k role-playing game lines, it's one of the few where the main enemy is a secessionist group, the Severan Dominant, which is a group of planets and star systems that have decided to secede from the Imperium, and the crusade that you're part of is fighting to get rid of them, to bring them back into the fold. Along the way, you find out that there's some chaos behind it, because that's one thing that 40k is very common. 40 chaos is almost always behind something bad. But yeah, I can understand why that would be a more gray area in 40k than, say, fighting orcs or fighting Drukhari or fighting Necrons. A lot easier, especially with Necrons. I mean, they're just robots, basically. But they're even soulless in the lore, which is like, oh, yikes. But yeah, I can see your point, Cynical Swallower.
Yeah, there's complexity there. Like, chaos is... Again, I'm not going to say evil, but it is so far removed from anything that can be tolerated by anyone who wants to continue existing in real space that it makes them kind of an easy villain. Like, okay, these guys are bad news. They need to go. Secessionists, you kind of envy them almost, right? Like, wow, it sure does suck around here.
Well, I salved my conscience with the fact that we did present a very, like a super reasonable secessionist in the Ascension book for Dark Heresy. We have a guy who's a planetary governor, and he's like, yeah, these are the reasons why we have seceded. And we leaned very hard into like making this a moral quandary, like why you should be examining yourself when you are like trying to bring this planet back into the fold, because they had very, very, very reasonable arguments. And one of the things that I've been really enjoying about the 40k setting, specifically 30k setting, is learning just how reasonable some of the arguments were on Horus's side of the Horus Heresy, for example. So, yeah, but getting back to like in general, Vera, what are some ways you've seen where people have rehabilitated these kinds of issues?
Well, I think there's a phenomenon that happens in the setting development for the rehabilitation of these, wherein we talked about like beauty earlier, and talking about like queer coding reminded me of this, that a lot of different fantasy species have begun getting depicted as, let's call it cuter again, like a Blizzard, for example, World of Warcraft. I'm an old school WoW player. I played Wrath of the Lich King as a tiny kid. I was on Ventrilo using a voice changer, sound like a grown man. That was fun. I was playing like Wrath in like the school lunchroom in like fourth grade, right? And then I went to Hearthstone recently and saw a Razorback, which are like these, they're these little funny hedgehog people, right? In WoW, and they were very cute. And I was shocked by this because classically they are very not. There's this shift because they were not razor. What are they called? They're not razorbacks. They're like the razor quills. The quillboar people. Like they're little hedgehogmen from the Barrens. Does this sound familiar to anyone? The point is they were like very grotesque and cannibalistic, and they were covered in gore, and they're now like hanging out at the beach with Mai Tais. There was like some card in the Battlegrounds thing in Hearthstone where they were like hanging out like with a little umbrella in there, and they were made very adorable in a way that I was not familiar with. And I see that as emblematic of this trend to depicting these different species as cuter and more human to invite that relatability and familiarity.
Yeah, I mean, you can even see this in things like the Jurassic Park films. My co-host Alexis from from Lorebeards 40K, she's a huge Jurassic Park fan, and you can see how dinosaurs were, in the first movie, absolutely antagonists, beautiful but antagonists, and then in the Jurassic World, they're allies, they're helping us. There's been this is common when you're trying to like add some more value or some more interest or some more engagement with the world, is sometimes to give people a different lens into something that they think they already know. And this whole morality thing, I mean, I think part of that is literally just from people going back and saying, hey, what's something interesting and different I can do with Dungeons and Dragons, with the fantasy tropes, because those have been saturated. They've been used a lot. So people trying to come up with something new, I think, is responsible for a lot of the discussions that we're having right now.
Yeah, I guess like the most on the nose way that there's been an attempt to address this would be the shift to like ancestry and so on in the D&D settings, right? Because no longer do you even get, I believe, characteristic bonuses from your species. That is determined elsewise.
Yeah, the most recent D&D version, 2024. God, what even is time? The 2024 edition does, I think, separate specific bonuses, and instead says, you can choose any, +1 to 3 or +2 to 2, I think, attributes. And then like the species stuff is more in special abilities or access to things that other species don't have.
I will say right now, I don't like this.
Interesting. Because why?
Because it does not make sense to me that a kobold has the same base stats as a Goliath. It strains my suspension of disbelief to a great deal. I think it is very strange. I think that based on their biomechanisms of the creature they are, the spindly 3-foot tall thing cannot lift as much weight as the 7-foot tall broad thing.
But I mean, and this is something you and I ran into when we made characters for all the different versions of D&D, though, is that sometimes it can have very strange like implications. Like if you remember, for basic D&D, if I wanted to be an elf, I had to be very smart.
Yep.
I had to have a high intelligence, and just it certainly gives me some weird like questions that crop up if the game is starting to tell me things like kobolds are dumber than most people, or it's starting to create that idea of stat essentialism. I don't know how else to say this.
Like the idea is like certain species are just like less charismatic or stupider or less wise. That's questionable, but I think we could agree it doesn't make sense that a kobold is equally as strong as a Goliath with 0 training, because just that it seems odd somehow. So perhaps there's a realm where these essential differences are rooted in physical characteristics exclusively, and that would make more sense. But it bothers me on paper. I see what it's trying to address, but the way it does it feels as if it denies interesting and kind of obvious differences.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's certainly something to think about. I don't typically play small species. I should really say that. I very rarely play small species. I should do more often.
Well, when I say this, I'm opening the door to similar arguments about like gender differences, right?
Oh God.
And that's got its own that's also a can of worms, because I don't think that we're going to be giving like female characters +1 dex, -1 strength, right? That's like probably a little far.
And that's was in the rule books. That was an actual thing.
That was a thing, and it's been removed. But I think that's a similar trajectory to this.
Oh yeah, very comparable. I would agree.
Where it's being that's been addressed like way beforehand, right?
Yes. Well, there's a game I desperately want to talk to you about on this show, which is called Super Babes. And
yeah.
Super Babes is based on the FemForce comics, I should point out. And it has one of the earliest examples of a boost mechanic for the player character that the player controls and is able to use to enhance their abilities in the game, like bennies, like inspiration, various hero points. Lots of different games have this kind of resource you spend to get a bonus, right? And Super Babes is one of the very first, if not the first, to have it. But it gets a little weird when you have to talk about what it's called, because in Super Babes that resource is called, deep sigh, Bimbo Points. Yeah. So let's just say it's very. The face on Vera is my. Yeah, I get it.
Huh.
Yeah.
Ross, is that an acronym by any chance?
No, it's not an acronym. No.
Okay.
Like I said, I really want to discuss it on this channel because it's a heck of a game with a lot of interesting history and stuff in it. And like I want to debate the whole like issue of the nomenclature there, because wow. But yeah, the point being though is that role-play games have struggled to address gender, but they have transcended that. I think gender is a more or less settled issue now that it doesn't really have much of an impact, unless, for example, there's a specific in-universe thing. But for a while, like male drow, female drow had different abilities, for example, that they can get. But largely, I would say gender has been transcended as an issue in role-playing games, and we're sort of fumbling our way through the dark to do this with regards to the morality of species and the moral essentialism and paladins and oaths and all the things that we've brought up to this date, that we're still 50 years later fumbling around like, I think we're getting closer to a consensus,
Yep.
Here's one from Pumpkin Asurian. Would you like to read this one?
Yeah, of course. There is also a question of bioessentialism in fantasy species and the problematic aspects of that. Legal Kimchi done a great video. I'm not familiar with Legal Kimchi, but it is an important topic.
What is an example of bioessentialism in fantasy species? That's Pumpkin Asurian. I would love to get an example of that. I would love to discuss this, but right now I'm a little lost on the specifics of what that means.
Well, because like it's the idea that like social roles are determined through genetics, right? As opposed to like cultural mores. Like I believe for the drow it's more cultural, but if they were like hardwired to have a queen bee society, that would be it, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a cultural issue. Even the Forgotten Realms, which is where a lot of this started. The Forgotten Realms is very clear, like that there are civilizations throughout that do not follow the matriarchal path, or they do, but in a different. They're not Lilith worshippers, and therefore are not necessarily evil, etc., etc. Wes Luce is asking, is that like dwarves living in mountains? I don't know. Yeah, is that bioessentialism? I don't know. Like we're definitely in some gray areas on the Venn diagram between like the trope and the term and like where that fits in, because a lot of this is just tropes handed down. Like it's part of what Western fantasy is that dwarves live in mountains and elves live in forests. That's kind of an accepted thing and has been since the 30s when Tolkien wrote about it.
I guess you could argue that like outsiders have elements of bioessentialism to them, where because of their origin, their genetic makeup being like literally the stuff of a plane of existence that characterizes them, they are hardwired to be a certain way.
Like the genocide and the tieflings, things like that.
Yeah, like if they're compelled to be mischievous in some way, right? Like there's tons of like older descriptions, like they're like a mischievous people. They're so silly. They're always playing pranks and stealing things. Like, okay, is that a cultural thing? If they're raised like a totally separate, does that happen or what?
Oddly enough, like one of my favorite things to go and look at for different campaign settings for D&D is like the cultural books. Like they'll in the known world, they had the books about the halflings and the dwarves of Rockholm and things like that. And I was like, I always kind of wanted to read like, how are these different than say the mountain dwarves of Thorbarden from Dragonlance, or the gold dwarves of the Forgotten Realms. I always really like those deep dives into the different cultures of a particular species. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like,
oh, Kender. Literally Cares brings up Kender. Oh man, that's a.
Oh no.
Yeah, we do talk about Kender, don't we?
Do you want to explain this? I'm not sure I can. Oh god.
Okay, so in the 80s, there's a very popular series of books called the Dragonlance novels. It covered a particular setting in D&D called Kryn, and on Kryn, there's a very particular type of halfling called Kender. Kender were generally fearless. They were culturally kleptomaniacs, and they were a little. They were tonally a little bit outside of like what you would expect from dark fantasy. They were, generally always happy and positive and things like that. There was a stigma associated with Kender in that era if you were role playing, because they were extremely difficult to role play without turning the player into just a total asshole who was stealing from everybody all the time. So there was a stigma against playing Kender for a very long time. I had that stigma. I was like, no, let's not have a Kender. It's just the issues are many. But that they've transcended that as well, because the stereotypes of Kender have largely been explained as like, that's one particular character, Tasselhoff Burfoot from the novels. They're not all just like him. Sweet Jesus, thank God. Dragonlance in general had some real issues with some of their cultural associations, like the Gully Dwarves were particularly problematic, I would argue. Anyway, point being, they were the Kender were a species that for a very long time were not welcome at many tables.
That's, in the abstract, that's a pretty interesting little phenomenon, right? Like this perceived bioessentialism leads to practical discrimination. Weird.
Salty Jump says the Gully Dwarves are 100% worse than Kender. I agree. I agree. And wow. Wow. Anyway, moving on. So I would say it's a pretty common thing that game masters and game designers underestimate how strongly the mechanics and the lore communicate values. Because we were talking about statistics just a little bit ago, like, whether someone is stupider, because they're of a certain species. That's what the mechanics are telling you, right?
Yeah.
The game telling players what they think is normal. This is something that I think a lot of designers and game masters certainly underestimate.
Yeah, like, thought experiment. In your setting, every no, just the abstract in the setting,
Okay.
in your being the royal you, the abstract you. Let's say that every species has a maximum of minus or +1 to a stat, except for the Dragonborn, who are +4 to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they're, of course, in charge of the setting because they're just better than everybody, and they're all so awful good. And like, what does this mean? What are we saying here?
I mean, you're basically talking about Space Marines in 40K.
Yeah, but they're saying it on purpose there. we know what it's saying in 40K.
Okay. You're saying, so I accidentally did this, right? I underestimated the impact.
Because like in 40K, it's like, wow, eugenics are terrifying.
Well, how would you approach that and say, like, what is that saying as a designer about the world, if that is something that I have put into the fabric of the setting?
Yeah, because you're implying there is a variety of people that is just better. And this does happen in Warhammer because elves are just better. And that's like something that's explored in depth, but it affects the setting a lot and it creates rules like no elves at the table. People will prevent you from making an elf at their table because you are just better, and it affects everything mechanically and narratively and everything else.
Fun fact, for at least 2 editions of Shadowrun, orcs were straight up the master race. Mechanically speaking, they were just better to play an orc than anything else. D&D also had this issue where elves were generally better than anyone else, and there was even a book, the Complete Book of Elves, where they really went in on that.
Yeah, like, because you can use this to highlight interesting things and create tension, right? But it does become obvious because people want to optimize and they notice this stuff. Is this a good time to talk about like monstrous races in like 3rd edition?
Please. Go on.
There were in 3rd edition and 3.5 a lot of new options, right, for character creation, which ranged from new templates you could trade levels for, to monstrous PCs who had like insane stats, but would again penalize class levels. Like you could play a gargoyle, which was like almost entirely broken with absurd bonuses to everything in exchange for a few character levels. And the narrative there was, yeah, you're like a dangerous monster, you're tough as all get out, but you have fewer practical skills like your teammates because your essence is monstrous, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not quite how it works anymore, right?
No. The goal is for everyone to advance at the same time, because what we learned is that advancing on a different scale than everyone else was actually really bad. It was not fun.
No, it's super broken. Either they are way too good or way too bad.
Yeah, Rifts has this issue too with characters being front-loaded, where a 1st level juicer and a 10th level juicer are not all that different because you get most of the stuff for a juicer at 1st level. So, yeah. there were other examples that were similar along these lines.
And certain monstrous abilities would, of course, just be so valuable that it would barely matter what your class levels were.
Flight is very strong in D&D. Being able to fly is a big deal.
You could fly and you're immune to poison and charm and have dark vision, and also you can stone form, become immune. And all right, cool. Also, you have +4 strength, +2 dex, +4 charisma, +2 wisdom. Okay, cool.
It can only be hurt by magic weapons. I don't know, something like that.
Seems good.
It's crazy.
You think it's playable? So that's an example of a narratively impactful thing that also has like a great mechanical distinction that is just impossible to run because you can't adapt for it. Like in fourth edition fantasy, we have like a distinction of maybe like 10 to 20% on a roll for certain characteristic gaps between elves and dwarves and people, but it's ultimately something that comes out in the wash because you can resolve that with a couple of 100 XP in some cases, right? For a given roll, it comes out to be a great total, but the mechanical gap is narrowable toward the end of progression.
Yeah, and I mean, depending on how you build your character, if there's no consequences for choosing certain things, then only that matters, and that is part of like that min-max thing we were talking about earlier. Like, it doesn't matter that I'm playing, it doesn't matter that I'm playing a Drow Ranger, because that's mechanically awesome, even if they are just like stereotypical as hell. Right.
Oh yeah, the highborn drow were crazy when there was that distinction between like the drow that have like charm skills and like the regular drow. That was absurd. What were they called, like true drow or something?
Drow in general were just like super strong for the most part.
That was like breathtaking, like just impossible.
You're breathtaking.
You're breathtaking.
Thank you, Keanu. Well, I mean, and the problem here is you don't want to just rely on the excuse of, well, it's just fantasy, it's just make believe, it's just sci-fi, it's just cyberpunk. It can be easy to dismiss a lot of these things, and I know people who do, because it makes, because as you say, like it turns that really cool power fantasy into like, are we actually the bad guys? Are we kicking puppies? And sometimes people don't really want to think about stuff too much. And again, that's fine. Like, I don't have a problem with that. It's absolutely, let's play some paranoia. Let's just do it. We don't have to think about it. But if you are thinking about it, if you want to create that deeper connection, that's when you need to stop using the excuses, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And I will say, I think it's getting harder to run that kind of game where it's like, let's mug all the goblins. Yeah, get them, stomp them. Because there are broadly more and more things that have shifted toward treating different species as if they were their own cultures. There's more of an effort to bring that kind of verisimilitude forward, and we see this in a lot of places. Just become part of the canon, right? The canon has shifted. You have games like Borderlands where it's like, oh, Psycho Raiders, just get them, and it's like tonally goofy, right? But
well, I think part of the reason is because it's fun and interesting to explore themes of injustice and reform and coexistence. Like, these are things that can be really, they can add a lot of depth and flavor. So in a way, going with like Paranoia as my go-to example, again, I would have a lot of fun playing Paranoia, but skipping all that does mean that Paranoia is inherently a slightly more shallow experience. That, again, may not be necessarily bad, but it is less interesting in some ways. Do you agree or disagree?
I think so. Yeah, I think I agree. I think that there's it's a difference, right? It's a way to add depth for sure, and it is something that requires a little buy-in, perhaps, but it's still like worth doing if you want that kind of tone to come across. We got a super chat also from Cynicalist.
Yeah, why don't you read this one?
Thank you so much, Cynicalist. Subspecies, mountain versus hill dwarves would not fly with humans. I don't like the idea of subspecies rules. Feels icky when applied to people. I think that it's an issue, again, of bioessentialism. This is a good example, perhaps, of saying that different, like, quote-unquote subspecies, or really races of that species, have different characteristics. We, in 4th edition, do different origin points. Like a human from the Reichland will have different base skills, perhaps, than someone from Marienburg, because they just grew up in a different environment and have different expertise. And that makes sense, right? Because, of course, if you grow up around horses, you'll know how to rear horses. If you grow up farming, you'll be perhaps a little hardier, right?
some of this also comes from Tolkien's establishment of the Western fantasy, right? Like, because the Rohirrim, they're all about horses. They do horse stuff. You want to do horse stuff, you're probably a Rohirrim. That I think that is some of the root belongs there, right? Of what this means. Also, subspecies doesn't necessarily mean a genetic difference so much as a cultural one. For example, in Kryn, in the Dragonlance world, mountain dwarves and hill dwarves are the same species. They just happen to live in different places and have different cultures.
Mm-mm.
And there's conflict that arises because some of them have chosen to live in the hills. In fact, Warhammer Fantasy had hill dwarves for a while until they were wiped out during the War of the Beard.
Yep, no topsiding allowed.
Elf dragons just roasted them all. Yeah, we have a whole. If you want to go over to the Lorebeards fantasy side, I was on an episode about the War of Vengeance with Lorebeards Sotek, so we covered it. Got another super chat here from Jazina Question. A good video to watch after this is the Lorebeard Slayers episode. And he talks about how most people don't write dwarfs accurately because people think like people rather than dwarfs. And I like how you spell dwarfs correctly.
Bonus point.
Bonus point.
Yeah, and I think it's quite challenging for people to write dwarfs well, and really to write a lot of non-human species well. We've talked about this a little bit, but it's hard to inhabit a inhuman perspective. And as we've seen and discussed, a lot of these like playable species varieties have been humanized more and more as people have played them more and more because it's easier the more similar they are.
Well, I mean, you can look at it that way. You can also look at it as just being more familiar offers more opportunities for different types of stories to be told. Good example here, I would argue, is the portrayal of Klingons in Star Trek. Going all the way back to the 60s, where they were basically just Fu Manchu stand-ins for the Chinese and Russians, all the way up to now where they have these very well-established lore about their beliefs, traditions, and values and goals. We know so much more about what Klingons are like these days than we used to. And, you know, that is probably happening with dwarfs in Warhammer Fantasy as well. It's just, it's on a different time scale.
Well, to pull from a different example in Star Trek, Spock.
Yes.
Spock is specifically half human.
Mm-hmm.
Because that makes him more relatable and it makes his perspective less alien.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yep.
And the advantage to that is that you're able to portray him more easily, for one. Poor Leonard Nimoy gets to emote a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a little tough for me sometimes to go back and watch some of those original series and see how McCoy treats him, and I'm just like, oh my god, dude, holy crap!
It's pretty rough. It's pretty rough.
Jesus.
But it's an example of a little bit of humanization, allowing you to tell more stories because it's a little more relatable and it's a little easier to inhabit. But you need to maintain that kind of crucial difference. I think that Spock really does because of both Vulcan culture and because of the framing that they place in the character to maintain that distinction, because it is important to allow for this difference. Because if all of your different species are just different kinds of human, you've kind of lost something. It becomes a little homogenized. This is part of why I push back against the entire abolishment of characteristic differences.
So here's the thing. I have been where you're at with that specific thing about the mechanics being crucial to kind of understanding that species in a role-playing game. The mechanics are story, as John Wick likes to say. Not John Wick the killer, John Wick the game designer. And I think he's right. I think mechanics are story, and I think you can learn a lot about a species by how its mechanics is presented in the game. Oftentimes, those mechanics are the first thing that drives me to find something interesting and want to play as it. This is true, certainly true for subclasses like the Echo Knight in 5th edition. I was like, oh my god, the way that the mechanics of this are amazing. I have to play this. But lately, I would say over the last 10 years or so, I have started to drift more and more towards the idea of the mechanics, especially with regards to like individual stats, are not where you're going to find that flavor. You're going to find that flavor in their culture and their traditions and their beliefs. And mechanically, you're going to see it in the things like special abilities and access and access to things other people don't have, or the opposite, you know. Uh, is it weird to think of a kobold who is as strong as a Goliath? Yes. But my brain is the type of brain that will instantly create like 3 characters who are all like super swobolds, if you will. and are, you know, the Hans and Franz of their particular village, and you know, why not? What's wrong with that? Like I guess
to me, that's more interesting when that's like more for them to overcome, when like naturally they wouldn't be, like, because the average kobold is as strong as an average Goliath when you homogenize the stats, and that's weird. That's weird. Like, here's my counterexample. What if you abolished the distinctions between characteristics between elves and humans in fantasy, and you had it be that the distinction is, okay, they have base magical sight, all of this stuff. They can cast a little better if they weren't, but otherwise they're just the same at default. It starts to feel really different in a way that denies that culture, because their culture is kind of founded on being in tune with the magic and being so advanced they feel entitled to like guide the human races, the high elves at least. Like there's all sorts of things going on, right? And that relates to their innate excellence. It's the inferior part.
Sure. I think we did talk about this earlier. Grimdark is kind of a specific slice of fantasy where things are a little different. I do feel like niches and roles and the inherent aspects of cultures are a little more static, a little more well-defined, a little more iconic, perhaps, in grimdark fantasy. And I think that's the point you're making, is that sometimes the mechanics are part of what makes a species iconic.
Yeah, in part.
That's reasonable. I think that's a very reasonable argument to make. I'm still on the opposite side of the point, but it's a reasonable argument to make.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair to argue that it's more in like these special qualities, especially in settings that rely less on that kind of divide. Like D&D tonally, I think, strives to be more in that range, right?
Certainly. Yeah, well, D&D is the baseline. It's what everybody plays before they can play something else, typically. Typically.
Very true, very true.
Yeah, I don't know. This is a discussion I think worthy of some exploration, because I think you make a solid point that sometimes the mechanics can be iconic for that particular species, even if it is somewhat deterministic about their inherent value or their inherent what's the word I'm looking for here? Optimization within the game, because playing elves is just you're literally just better in Warhammer Fantasy. Just like playing an orc in certain versions of Shadowrun, you'd be just better.
To me, a kobold barbarian is way more interesting when they have -4 strength at base than when they don't.
There are other ways to present that, though. Like there's the idea that as a small creature, they can only wield weapons up to a certain size, so they're inherently dealing slightly less damage. You can, without just coming out and saying kobolds are weaker than humans. There's the mechanic that the Goliaths have, where they just can lift and carry twice as much as an ordinary person can, and they get advantage on checks for that kind of thing, without it being a simple bonus to strength.
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to our discussion we were talking about the hero system and talking about how speedsters don't necessarily have to have more actions per round. They can just do more on their action conceptually, right? So kind of following that same trail, you can have a a mechanic that makes kobolds feel like they're small and scrawny without saying your potential is capped at this number and no higher. You know what I mean?
I see where you're coming from. I think I prefer to come at it from an angle where the potential cap is less of an existing thing, but the natural debuff is like when you can overcome that. But mechanically, yeah, you only get so many opportunities to increase your base score. So running raw, we do encounter those.
I like it. Raw. Rules is written, baby. So yeah, where should we take this discussion to now? So we've covered, I think, a pretty good amount of ground so far. It's pretty wild. Do you have some specific examples of this from your journeys through role-playing games you'd like to share?
Oh, I'm just fascinated by kobolds. I've played a lot of martial kobolds in my time. And it's more interesting for me to build around them having lower strength. Like I, again, am a very mechanically engaged player. I like to start with the concept I want to bring across, and then try and optimize that as I can in the way that like is true to that idea. And like, how do you build a kobold that hits things very hard? And it's kind of exciting. To use finesse? Maybe. Do you rely on stacking poisons, perhaps? Like, what do you do to enable this? It's cool. It's cool. Like, you get like bonus die on something. I find that a very compelling concept to like work around limitations like this, and I think that it's part of what's intriguing about character creation, and the reduction of that difference leads to less of a diverse building strategy, right?
What about the storyteller system in Vampire the Masquerade, things like that? Have you had experience dealing with, the feeling of playing a monster versus, superhero with fangs?
My experience in VTM is that a lot of that will come down to your internal world as a player. I think that like there are certain systems in tabletop games where really certain moments, certain ideas in tabletop games where the amount that you engage with them and what you get out of them stems from your internal world, from like the way that you engage with that and have like your personal reflection on it, right? How much it means to you for your character to gain or lose humanity has to do with how close you feel to that character, how you feel their narrative evolving, how you see them reflecting on that sensation of some loss they can't quite define.
See, I feel like that is why a lot of games of Vampire the Masquerade skewed towards superheroes with fangs. I think people found it, I think Game Master specifically found it challenging to make preying upon other humans have that moral weight while still being fun. And I think most of the times what would happen is a game master for a storyteller system game, vampire, werewolf, or whatever, would reframe their campaign largely around dealing with other supernaturals and to avoid that issue.
That happens a lot. You have like some werewolf group that you beat up and they're invincible, so it's fine if you like pummel them. They're really hard to kill. So
right, and they want to wipe you all out, and they're not going to listen to reason. Yeah, that's where I think you get that superhero with fangs vibe, is from people who are just like, I'm not going to engage with that part of the setting. Instead, I'm going to focus on the factional conflicts, and the monstrous abilities are cool, like set dressing for this, but it is not about being a monster. It's about fighting other monsters as a cool, like, action hero, basically.
Yeah, and what I would call the compelling narrative of Vampire is the idea that the power structure you are forcibly inducted into is one that is hellish, and a bunch of monsters play acting at royalty, right?
And I think the reason why I want to bring this up and discuss it is because, again, there's nothing wrong with a fun, shallow, like let's just have a good time game. There's a setting for D&D called Neon Odyssey that looks amazing. We have a whole episode on it. I want to play it so bad. It is a game that is on the surface level, or setting on the surface level, that I just want to be a part of. Like, I don't really care about anything else. However, the stuff that we're talking about here today, the ideas of ethics, the ideas of morality, the portrayals of stereotypes, the challenging of narratives about inherent goodness or evil. The reason why these things are important is because it is a way to elevate your game. If you find yourself thinking, "Man, I wish I had more, depth or complexity in my campaign," one of the ways to introduce it is to start thinking about these things more deeply. Start trying to look past the surface and see where you can find narrative beats and story moments that your characters, your players, I should say, that the players at your table are going to say, "Hey, that's cool. I want to talk about that. I want to have my character have a perspective on that. I want to get involved and maybe change something in the world regarding that." So the reason why it's important to bring these things up is not to shake our fingers. We're not just sitting here going, you did not do it right. No, instead it's a way to be like, here's a way, here's a lens through which you can look at your campaign and pick out and find areas where there's more nuance and more complexity that your player characters can engage with. That's where I'm coming from. What do you think, Vera?
No, firmly agree. Like, again, like, it could be like actively less fun to think about this stuff deeply. Like,
it
could be a real fucking bummer. Like, wow, that's heavy. Oh my god, what are we doing? It's one thing for Vampire the Masquerade to turn into, wow, we're monsters. It's another thing for your like third level campaign in D&D.
What are some ways you would advise a game master who mayhaps unintentionally steps on that landmine in their game and they're like, "Oh shit, now I have this moral quandary where I really just wanted a rollicking adventure through the mountains"?
When they loot the Knoll village, don't put in babies. just don't include the moral quandary. There are like certain framing devices you can use for this too. Like a lack of free will and like a complete destruction of self is like a thing. Like you'd have like a animate undead that are released from torment when you smash them. You can have like constructs as villains. This is something like it. Look to like kids media for inspiration. Super Sentai. The putties are like made of clay, right? Mm-hmm. Or they're like things are like even in Warhammer, the demons are sent back to the warp when they're beaten up. You can have enemies that are not like torturous to vanquish, right? Where you're like doing an unambiguously good thing. Some of this goes into like setting planning, the kind of villain you want, right?
And if you can explore a lot of these ideas and concepts through different supernatural effects. Like one of the things I'm kind of infamous for is like if my group encounters a bad guy and they capture him and they intend to like, get information out of this guy. Well, something I'm infamous for is I will almost always have some sort of way for that guy to either die or get teleported out or something, because usually like I have a big bad who has a lot of these tools that they're available to them, mind control or teleportation or intimidation of an entire culture, things of that nature. So you can turn those moments, at least I like to think you can turn those moments in your campaign into hints at the larger story. You can be like, yeah, it's weird that this paladin wants to like absolutely murder all the babies in the orc village. Maybe you should look into that and find out why he's got that bizarre fixation. There's ways to do it too. Like if you come across something that seems very stereotypical, some of your player characters start commenting on like, wow, this is really racist. You can be like, it does seem that way, doesn't it? Now think about why that is. Could an aboleth be mind controlling some of the people in this village to carry on its own xenophobic tendencies? Right? Once you start plugging those things into your game, it can be fun to bring them in as part of the villain's plan. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and this is an evolution of like other good GM technique where you like take what your players are already taking interest in and use that to flesh out the direction of things. Like it should be rewarding to investigate this stuff too. Like you want your players to kind of get what they want out of these moral quandaries, right? It's satisfying to come to a resolution. It just can be heavy,
And I think it is perfectly valid to have mustache twirling bad guys who are just bad because being bad feels good. You can literally have the Joker in your campaign, and that's fine. It is sometimes okay to be like, yes, aboleths are just straight up evil because they're alien intelligences from beyond our plane of comprehension. They've existed since before the gods, like in the Forgotten Realms. If something that's sufficiently alien to us, that thinks in a sufficiently alien way, I mean, that might as well be a moral essentialist of evil.
Yeah, like it can be quite rewarding actually, especially in a campaign that does have these like shades of gray, to have some group that just like real bastards. Like
it can be very satisfying. Villains that are satisfying to punch in the face can be a very good tool for your campaign. And sometimes it can be just like unambiguously like, wow, we need to save these people because they are being oppressed, or we need to stop this genocide because that is a objectively bad thing. Oh, what? I see the face. Oh, okay. I thought you might have had something to say. I was like,
no, I do. I'm just thinking this through. I feel like one tack here can be to have your evil species be either bewitched in some way or otherwise dispossessed. Like it's like then it becomes a kind of grim necessary evil, but your end goal is to solve that, you know, which can motivate cool gameplay where your players are trying to use non-lethal tactics or not, and like that removes some of the moral quandary. It's not like, oh, should we slaughter the babies? It's like, okay, how do we navigate this? Is this necessary self-defense, which is like a lighter form of grim? This sort of tracks back to like the Legions of Sauron a little bit.
And good players are invaluable in these situations. If you have a player who comes up with a solution and says, hey, you know what we should do is form an orc orphanage, and I am excited about this idea, you as a game master should be like, hell yeah, that sounds cool. Let's do that. Let's set up an orc orphanage. Let's work out all the reasons why that would be something that most cities do not want in their backyard, and how you're going to overcome that. You can tell a hell of a campaign actually just based on that singular premise.
And you can play into all of this stuff, but again, that's a very different type of game tonally, right?
Well, tone is, I would argue, like all the things we've discussed so far, 2 hours of the show, it's all about that tone, the tone of your game. How do you use these things or avoid using these things to maintain the tone that you want?
Very true. Like ultimately, again, there is no like absolute right or wrong way to do these things, but part of the issue is when you have some players who will light on these issues and others who really won't. Session 0, baby.
Yeah, a good example. Obviously, my history working with Warhammer 40K roleplay, a lot of that, you know, I mean, the setting frames certain things as good, even though there are no good guys in 40K. But like the protagonists, and this is something I've had to deal with, like writing Rogue Trader, writing Deathwatch, you know, especially for Deathwatch, like genocide is a straight up like a good thing. Like, yes, we want to destroy all of the Gene Stealers, all of them, everywhere, no matter what. That's just how Deathwatch works. So some settings lend themselves to unexamined aspects of these things, which
I would
Vera and I both have strong experience with.
I would say Gene Stealers are a good example of an unambiguous evil also. They are prey to a hive mind. Their ambitions are to consume and destroy everything, including themselves, in service of this cloud of death that wants to descend upon everything. Hive minds are a great tool for this kind of stuff too, because they are if the one thing at the top is evil, then the whole way down is pretty bad too, and you can either free things from it or else it's just they're all appendages of the Hydra, right?
And a great example of this comes from Star Trek with the Borg. And the Borg have been portrayed as a monolithic evil, but they have also been able to free individual units of the Borg who have turned out to be heroes, or at least supporting characters like Hugh. So, yeah, You can look at pop culture to see how a lot of ways that people have tried to address this issue in different ways.
Yeah, like the Daleks are hilariously
Oh my
evil.
God, yes, the Daleks. Oh, they are such a good villain too.
Well, it's very clear what they're about, right? They sort of tell
Yeah.
you right away.
Yeah. I admire the Daleks as an unambiguously evil bad guy. I am 100% on board with like Daleks are good villains.
No, they're effective and they're direct, right?
And one of the reasons they work so well in Doctor Who is because Doctor Who specifically is not a kill on sight protagonist. He tends to avoid violence. He tries to achieve the greatest good, right? So the Daleks provide a fantastic contrast to that particular type of morality. And almost all the things we've been talking about today, like all the different ways that moral essentialism can be bad, can also be a really good way to illustrate or make contrasts of tone and in your setting to help flesh it out and make it feel more real. Again, I'm not advocating for putting in a lot of like real world racism or anything, but I'm saying stereotypes and unambiguous evil guys. The things we have discussed today, where we have talked about how they can be useful in many different ways.
Yeah, and I would say that most games will veer away from like themes that expressly interrogate like ideas of real world racism. It can get touched on in some darker games, and it's hard to run well for a lot of reasons. And really, you see that shift in the fictional settings as well. Like there was a lot of like elf and dwarf jockeying inspired by Tolkien that's sort of been minimized in D&D. At least it's been maintained for the most part in Warhammer, but even then, like the way it's depicted is softer.
Yeah, well, that's a classic, is the elf and dwarf rivalry and why that exists and how it's portrayed. Yeah, and again, like we could go back to like how Spock is treated and say like, okay, that's actually making me uncomfortable. Or we could go to, say, the Gimli, Legolas, and the Lord of the Rings films and say, okay, that's a far more interesting and healthy approach to a rivalry or misconceptions about each other's species. And a great arc overall for those two characters, in fact.
Yeah, there's lots of potential. Just it's a matter of tonality. It's a matter of how it's handled. Again, like good players help a lot, as a matter of fact. Have people who are invested in fleshing this out.
And Vera, what's the best way to find out if your players are interested in fleshing this out?
Session 0! Hey! Talk to them. Use words. Wow.
Yeah, it goes without saying, but it's worth saying it anyway, that all the stuff we're discussing today on this episode is things you should probably consider discussing in Session 0, because you don't want this to be a big surprise to your group to be like, oh, hey, look, racism. It's worth communication, even if you do step on that landmine. Let's say you're running your D&D game and you come across this issue where the paladin wants to kill all the babies, and you're like, I'm not okay with that. Communication is your number one tool right then and there. Stop the game, pause, and have a chat, and kind of figure out where everybody's at expectations wise, because you don't want your game to die. And I hate to say this, but a lot of the things we've been talking about today can be game killers. I know people that have gotten up and walked away.
Oh, yeah.
If there's the wrong kind of fantasy racism.
Well, people are naturally sensitive to this kind of stuff. And I think that it's the kind of dynamic where if it's unexpected, it can be pretty heavy. I've sure had tables where I've suddenly realized some things, but one of my other players in the middle of the game, like, oh my God. And you can put the brakes on things. You can like run a session X.5, but it's important to like communicate about this stuff.
And again, it can be a compelling character story to tell, to start out as a prejudiced jerk who learns to not be so close-minded, right? And if you are intending to play a character along those lines, if that's a redemption arc that you want to explore, that's also really important to get across in Session 0, because you don't want people just thinking, wow, what an asshole. If you haven't prepared them ahead of time saying, I want to play a character who starts out being an asshole and ends up not an asshole. Very different reactions you will get at the table if you clue them in early on.
Also, not the easiest to play, I would say. Like it's a Goblin Slayer again is a really intriguing example of this, where you have a character who is going off like on these filthy fucking goblins, these little bastards. They ruin everything, and in the setting they kind of do, and his intensity is such that it bothers people in the narrative because, oh my god, this guy's a little sick in the head. And I would say if I had somebody playing that kind of character at my table, I would be a little suspicious of where that comes from if they had not expressed explicitly how they wanted to handle it. Because that's really intense stuff, right?
Concerned. I would be concerned.
Yeah.
Are you okay, buddy? Is everything all right?
Well, because it's wrapped up in like violent urges and what is overtly essentialism, and like this is stuff that's again pretty well justified by the narrative there, but it's heavy. It's very heavy. People might not want to be around that, whatever the narrative arc for it is.
I mean, that's the title of murder hobo that gets thrown around these days is, I think, a direct result of people playing with moral essentialism and playing, where the indulgence of violence is lesser than the examination of the society, right, if you will. So yeah, our adventurers murder hobos. I mean, historically, yes, absolutely. and you can look at it, obviously this is more fantasy than anything else. Again, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is more applicable to fantasy than, say, sci-fi as a genre. But even so, yeah, adventurers, you are paid to go kill things, typically. You kind of need to reframe sometimes, like what that means to be an adventurer. Is being an adventurer being a murder hobo, or is it more about exploration? Is it more about charting a course? Is it more about just the freedom that life offers outside of the strict bonds of, say, noble society? These are the questions I think that make a campaign more interesting if you do dwell on them a little bit.
For sure. But this is also the kind of thing that can lead to misalignment, because like if one character's goal is to eradicate every gnoll and the other character's goal is to like find their lost father, we've got a perhaps an interesting mismatch, but they're very dramatic gap in vibes, right?
Gnoll Slayer, I'd watch that anime.
Hit spinoff.
But no, for real, like the lens through which we've looked at adventurers for a very long time has been in the viewpoint of, what can they kill? A dragon slayer is a very strong trope in Western fantasy. The idea of Legolas being able to murder 50 orcs in one single action scene. These are things that have been around for a very long time, and so it's about re-examining. It's about rethinking how we approach these things without tampering with like what makes the game fun at its baseline. Because again, the goal is to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Sarmelian Bloodweaver. Would you like to read this one?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarmelian. Possible campaign idea. The party's mission is to get a ritual done that turns the big bad evil guy's army of unstoppable mindless murder beasts into people.
That is a good campaign idea. I'd play that.
Yeah, that's fun stuff. You have like certain properties that play into ideas like this. Like cartoony example, Sonic the Hedgehog. All of those villainous robots, you pop them open. Oh, there's a little birdie inside. He's flying away. He was powering it. So you're freeing them by doing this. There are a few Super Sentai shows that operate in this principle. You pummel the sin out of the bad guy. The person inside the shell gets popped out and they're freed, right?
Imagine if you could reverse the corruption of the elves in Lord of the Rings and turn all the orcs back into elves. That would be pretty wild. Like I love that concept as a ideal, especially as something because it's achievable in fantasy, in a role-playing game. This is something you could really literally do. I kind of dig it.
No, this is fun. Like you could build a setting around this, right? Like where all of the so-called like evil creatures or like other species and whatnot that have been affected in some way. They're like you're freeing them with your ultra violence. Very stylish, very fun.
Yes, I'm freeing them with ultraviolence. I love it. I'm liberating them from their life of squalor.
I say this as an anime fan. There's something very cool about like a big glowy finishing attack that explodes someone, only to have them reform into what they were before. Like, all right, cool, neat.
Yep.
Something in Kingdom Hearts.
There is a horrible anti-example of this, which is the old comic book of Rom, Space Knight, where Rom, when he first appeared, he was hunting down the dire wraiths, who were these shape-shifting alien witches. So they would live among human society, and he would just point his neutralizer at them, pull the trigger, and the neutralizer, what it would do is send them back to their home dimension. Okay, it would banish them out of our world. But the way it did it was you would hear this horrible scream, and you would see a body-shaped pile of dust left behind, which, yeah, which is like the exact opposite. Yeah, I mean, like, oh, you don't really feel great about like redeeming the dire wraiths with Rom's neutralizer. It's like, whoa, mama. Just do me a favor. I think we have one mod in the chat. If we've missed any of the Twitch super chats, because they are a little harder to see, please do me a favor. Let me know. Yeah, we have at least one mod, I think, in the chat today. So just wanted to double check on that. They are a little harder to tell, and I don't want to miss any of the Twitch super chats.
Darn you, StreamYard.
I'm just part of it is just getting old. Like, it's hard for me to read some of the small text. I have to bring it up on screen. But yeah, where would you like to take this discussion now? We've covered a good amount of ground.
Well, we've discussed some of the trajectory, some of the mechanical concerns. I guess a broad spectrum idea is like what's next for the depiction of species in tabletop gaming. Like what is the ideal, perhaps? What is a good way of portraying difference and allowing for different mechanical expression and preventing like essentialism from tainting the well?
So, I mean, one way is to talk about the difference between a perspective of a species rather than objective truth. And we've talked a little bit about this, like specifically in Warhammer, like, it is objectively true. Elves are just better than you. It is objectively true. Demons do not get killed. They just get banished back to the warp. But you can talk about like the perspective on whether the elves should stay a thing, whether their twilight is a bad thing or not, right? Leaving space for humanity, whether the decline of the Dawi is a good thing or a bad thing, because they've had, they certainly had their issues. Again, going back to the War of Vengeance, the both sides were horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And consistency is like one of the big deals. I've talked about this a lot with being a game master, but keeping your world consistent. It's also true about the consequences of staying consistent. Is there social fallout, legal fallout from destroying a species or considering a species only as an enemy? You should probably, if you're going to go into it, have some kind of consistent answer.
Yeah, and I suppose there's a few different dimensions of this too. Like you have perhaps there is sort of a inherent element to some of this, like because the species processes things differently. They are different sensorily. They are naturally inclined to value certain things more or less. Like this harkens back to Andy's discussion of interpreting forms of neurodivergence as inspiration for distinguishing certain species, right?
Yeah, and I think what I'm talking about, like the consistency here, I'm talking about like there's the idea of a monstrous species, right, can be very pulpy, like the drow or the demons or various other bad guy species. But it can be a lens to explore ethics, to look at power and temptation and cruelty, and how those things can get normalized. Like that's one place I would like to maybe look at and take a look at, say, look at orc society.
I track back to this like sensory idea just because to me that like allows for consistency though, because let's say that elves are just like way more aware of noises and lights and so on, and perhaps they value quiet and like whatever culture they're raised in. This holds true because it'll just bother them, right?
Here's a great comment from Ricardo Andre. Says the indomitable human spirit should exist for every species in their own unique way. For example, elves or Eldari, after the downfall, some should go quietly into the night, and others would take Cain in their heart and fight to the end. Domination, subjugation of others, fight tooth and nail for their power and their right to live, to deny what the universe decrees for them. I love the idea that every species has an indomitable spirit. That there's always some. Go ahead.
No, I agree. There's some people who will fight to the end, and this also allows for like a range of expression because it's important that your species isn't like monolithic, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the more difficult ones to talk about is like the idea of the undead, because they are the monolith when it comes to fantasy as a trope. Like undead is very rarely not a monolith. And the sheer act of being one of the living dead is unnatural. And well, I mean, that's not even talking about things like vampires who have to prey upon other living beings in order to survive. The undead can simply represent evil at its highest level. There's nothing more wrong than seeing something that is dead that should be dead but is not. It's a great shorthand.
Yeah, they're like an abomination, right?
But even still, even within that, you have examples like Lord Soth from Dragonlance. I brought up Dragonlance a lot today. There's examples like the different vampires in Vampire the Masquerade. They're not necessarily all monsters. Some of them are working towards a good future. Sometimes it is more the banality of evil too. Like you can have a vampire who's like, yeah, I turned into a vampire just because I'd like to stay up late at night and code.
Very cool.
I just order, very rare steak from the grocery store and suck all the blood off of that. There's different ways to examine this, and the opportunities that these things provide, if you take them seriously and study them, there's a lot of great room for your story in terms of the game master running the game, and the character story if you want to have your character react or respond or want to try and change some of these things. Maybe there's a fairly common character trope called the ethical necromancer, right? Like, how do you
yes.
Would you like to describe this one, Vera?
Oh, just it's the idea of like how to employ necromancy in a way that isn't like lawful evil. Like you're doing something that's kind of a perversion of nature. Like how do you make this morally okay? Do you not raise anything and use like other necromantic spells? Do you have a different like religious justification for the negative energy you're channeling? What does that mean in this setting? What does it mean for you? Are you accept that? Are there others like this? Is this an accept? Like, there's all sorts of questions it raises. Because it's pretty shocking to see grandma shuffling around and like doing combat, like sick kung fu moves as a puppeteered. Like this is upsetting for most people, right? So,
oh my god, I now have to have a grandma necromancer in my next D&D game because that's amazing. Yeah, the idea of an ethical necromancer, that is something that comes up a lot in D&D. This and Paladins, I think, are probably the two like biggest moral issues from the player character side. Undead don't have to be a monolith. Tropes usually portray them as such, but they don't have to be. You can have a particularly with any kind of intelligent undead like ghosts or liches. you could argue, say, one of the most interesting characters in Warhammer 40k is Trazen the Infinite, who is effectively a lich. He's effectively a lich who just likes to collect shit, right? So yeah, just because something is an undead or a demon doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be always evil. And there's value in portraying them as largely evil or usually evil, because the surprise factor can be important and interesting in a tabletop role-playing game where you're like, yes, you've run into this succubus. Her name is Fall from Grace, and she's not interested in taking your soul. Like that's like, oh wow, okay, interesting. This has changed my context for the situation that I'm in. Or if you run across a talking skull who happens to be extremely friendly and wants to show you the way out of the labyrinth, right? Those could be really great little fun NPCs to throw around, or encounters, I should say, is probably a better way to put it.
Undeath has a lot of potential for like being a new existence too. Like one example that's like quite classic is Frankenstein's monster, who is sort of a new individual constructed as an undead.
Adam.
Yeah.
Well, it's Frankenstein's monster. I mean, technically, he is kind of undead, isn't he? I mean, he's more often portrayed as a golem in terms of mechanics for D&D, but yeah, I guess. Yeah, strictly speaking, yeah, undead. Yeah, good point.
Well, they're reanimated, like from parts, sure, but like the distinction between a flesh golem and an undead creature is, to me, minimal. I mean, it certainly raises a lot of the same ethical questions, but even more so, like what's worse, like reanimating Grandpa, or like Grandpa being the upper thigh of this other guy?
Okay, here, this is a deep cut, and definitely, man of a certain age territory. But if anybody's ever seen the animated film The Last Unicorn, there is a skeleton that they run into in this castle that's actually very friendly and happy to help. All he wants is something to drink, even though any bottle that he puts to his mouth, it just pours right down through his ribcage. He doesn't give a crap. He wants to drink. And I love that. I love the idea that you could run across a talking skeleton and it didn't like absolutely turn into like, kill it with fire. Instead, it was a really fun, like little, like, oh, you need to go that way at the next intersection, just really great little role-playing encounter. Does anybody else remember that? Am I the only one?
That drunk skeleton is one of very few things I know about The Last Unicorn, actually, because it's just such a cool visual.
And the theme song. Love the theme song. Anyway, yeah, God, The Last Unicorn. I can't believe I'm still thinking about that 40 years later. Wild. Peter Beagle would be very happy with me, though, the author. So let's see. We got a comment from Ricardo Andre here. It says, "Life for life, blood for blood. What once was shall be once more, and what will be will never come." In my opinion, the morality of undeath comes fundamentally on whether the skeleton is part of the soul or not. If so, evil. If not, it's just bones, and you're not holding a person hostage. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. You can just recontextualize everything. This is something I talked about earlier with the idea of like a villain mind controlling people or whatever. But yeah, is if the state of being undead has nothing to do with the soul, if it's merely an animating force for a corpse that is otherwise just bones and meat, that does tend to remove the moral issue right off the bat. And it gives you a great, they're basically just robots made out of bones and meat. You can just kill all you want, we'll make more. And The Walking Dead is a great example of like, that's exactly how those zombies work.
Yeah, it's also a question like what the soul means, what the metaphysics of the setting are like. Like in Warhammer, is it okay to do anything to the Necrons because they don't have souls?
I mean, just like red-haired people, they don't have any souls.
Exactly.
Ooh. Here's a great one. Would you like to read this one?
Yeah, Necroplayer, thank you so much. Eberron has some fascinating ideas dealing with the undead, especially the Blood of Vol, who have intelligent and as members of the clergy. Yeah, I can see that. That's like that's making an interesting claim about the soul also, because again, like the Blood of Vol, as we discussed briefly during the Forgotten Realms episode, they are respecting the divinity within, sort of. They are very inward with their religiosity, sort of the I'm an island type of thinking.
Hmm.
So an intelligent undead could preserve that self indefinitely.
Well, I mean, this goes back to your idea, like as a hive mind being a really good explanation for evil behavior as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, mind flayers famously kind of touch on this, right? Like they're this
Oh,
distinctly evil creature, and very any that are exempt from this are somehow able to resist the hive mind, and otherwise they are appendages of this tentacled monstrosity that wants to suck your brain out. So
great villains too. I love mind flayers as bad guys in D&D. They're just excellent. They're really, really good. I think the next question I would want to ask you, Vera, is, when as a game master should I start to get concerned that I have stepped on a landmine? What are the signs that tell me that I have wandered into a part of species immorality that I don't want in my game?
bugged out eyes, gasps. I mean, usually you'll know because there's going to be an argument at the table, right? Like there's going to be sudden pointed discussion as to what to do next.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest signs for me that I've stepped on a landmine is if the whole table breaks down and stops worrying about what's happening in the game, and instead is like, hey, I don't like this, I'm not comfortable with this, or they start arguing whether it's okay or not okay. Half the table may be on one side, half the table may be on the other side, and you're like, okay, that's not what I was intending here, this is just a combat encounter.
I think it's hard to miss though. Maybe not always. Like you might notice like one player becoming kind of withdrawn as an alternative. Like they are no longer engaged. That's another possible sign that somebody is uncomfortable, right? That like one of your players is suddenly like dealing with this in a way that they don't want to articulate. That could happen.
Yeah, I think if negative emotions are starting to be, read the room, right? Like if people are starting to really get angry or upset, or if there's a undercurrent of genuine discomfort, I think is a good place to talk about that too. And this goes back to some of the stuff we talked about in session 0, where hey, it's never a bad thing to pause the game and just ask how everybody's doing. It's never a bad thing. If you are ever concerned that you've lost your group or that they've wandered into territory where you're like, I just didn't really want to do this, be like, hey guys, let's take a 5-minute bio break. Is everybody feeling okay? Are we having a good time? Just, I like to do that a lot. It's good to check in with your players.
Yeah, and I would say that it's especially important when things get heavy, right? Things can tend that way.
And we've got a question from Ricardo Andre. It says, veteran DMs, I have a question. How do you deal with a player who is more worried about what the DM thinks the answer is rather than what the puzzle actually is? Metagaming.
So I don't run a lot of like puzzles for this reason, among others. I feel like the answer for patterns like this can often lie out of game. Like, people should be encouraged to try and inhabit the space of their character, right? And to work through things from that perspective wherever possible, I would say.
I think he nailed it by saying it's part of a pattern. Like, like if it happens once, I don't think it's a big deal. Like, okay, yeah, he was trying to read me rather than read the puzzle. Okay, whatever. But if it's a pattern, if this happens a lot, that's when you need to be like, hey, let's talk about this. Why are you so concerned about my frame of mind rather than the scenario that I'm presenting? Right? Like, I want you to be living in the moment with your character and be reacting to the situation. And I feel like you're just trying to read me more than anything else. Good moment for communication for sure. And I think a lot of what we discussed today is really just about trying to avoid getting locked into patterns that can be a problem for your game. You don't want to be stuck in a pattern that isn't helpful.
Yeah, broadly, that's like part of the idea, I think, in like maintaining table health is avoiding like negative patterns from repeating themselves. Because if there's a point of tension over one thing, it will happen again. It will happen again.
To be clear, he says, I've been throwing moral problems to the player characters, and one of my players is trying to get the answer through his understanding of my morality and my interpretation of the setting. Well, as the game master, that's kind of your role. You have to be the guy who tells everybody what's going on. So maybe he's just trying to pay a little extra attention. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure I agree. Like, to some extent, this is like the central question of the day, right? It relates to how you as the GM bring across the big ideas in the setting and like what that can mean. And there are perhaps some examples of how your morality can make it into the game, no matter what. Like there's a running gag like Brennan Lee Mulligan, the enemy is always capitalism, right?
He's not generally wrong either.
I think that's characters a lot of the Dropout games. It's like that's become the thing. Like, hey, the bad guy is this abstract concept of people who embody it. But I feel like the range of what's evil is often going to be broader than the idealized good of the GM, right? And there are a lot of different kinds of like good enough that should be empowered by most settings. Like earnestness, I think, should be rewarded more than like getting the right answer.
Yeah, this is a lot of this is about rewards, right? Because
yeah,
in first and second edition, you got straight up XP for killing everything, and so that encouraged a certain thing, a certain aspect of it. Did we lose Vera? Or she
I'm here. Just
you're briefly.
All
right.
I've become a demon, I think.
But yeah, like what do you reward? If you reward interesting and value-driven decisions, regardless of what they are, rather than just, well, you killed the right thing, that's going to keep the focus of your game on the story of the character, and make their choices matter more, I think. Loyalty, mercy, fanaticism, betrayal. These are the character stories. These are the beats that you want to hit narratively. So reward those rather than just mindlessly like, well, you killed 10 orcs, so here's 500 XP.
Well, yeah, and I would argue that like evil behavior should also be rewarded. Like I not as a matter of course, but yeah, doing evil is kind of profitable. Like the tension that introduces should be between the players, right? It should be a thing that manifests interpersonally and in how they relate to the rest of the world. People can get away with stuff. Maybe their character arc is they do bad shit sometimes, and yeah, that can be pretty lucrative.
I mean, Star Wars as a franchise is a place where you've seen a lot of really questionable decisions, and whether there's a lot of examination over whether they should be rewarded or not, right? Specifically, like how the Jedi handle each other and the Sith and things like that. That's a good place to look for the start of like questioning morals and moral absolutism. Are all Sith evil? Are all Sith born evil? Or is the path of the dark side just easier and more seductive, and therefore draws more morally compromised people to it?
Well, like Star Wars, you want to talk about like bioessentialism, the OG Sith species who are just like attuned to the dark side. Like, all right, okay.
That was definitely moral. What's the word? Moral essentialism. Yeah, the original Sith Empire. Yeah,
they had the naughty midichlorians.
But even then, I think you could say like there's individuals that could transcend their origins.
Yeah,
it's not a bad thing to have a big bad evil guy. It's not a bad thing to have have a evil empire, as long as you don't lean too hard on the idea that everyone's evil just because they're part of this group, just because they were born this way, just because they're from this particular part of the world.
Yeah, like I would say that the larger a group is, the more variance should have within it. But that's just my broader sensibility as a writer.
Well, we're in the last 15 minutes of our show, so now would be a great time to give our final thoughts on species and morality, which we've this is one of our shows that we've wandered a very broad stretch of territory.
It's a wide topic, right? The most important takeaway, I think, is to be deliberate and to communicate. Like,
yeah. Go ahead.
No, you can approach this with a lot of varying levels of depth depending on what suits your table and the ideas you want to bring across. And not all of those are suitable for all players. You can do nuanced and kind of compelling interrogations of like how racism manifests in the real world. That is not going to be fun for most people, but Nordic LARP does this deliberately.
That's true. Yupe is in the chat, so you can respond to that if you want, if you're curious. I would say, for me, my final thoughts are this. A lot of it's about the framing. A lot of it's about the rewards. A lot of it is about being consistent with the consequences of morality. And I would say that not every game is going to benefit from examining this. If you're just a more casual player, if you just prefer a more casual, shallow game, nothing wrong with that. I know shallow has a pejorative aspect to it. I'm just saying that because that's the word that came to mind. But if you want a deeper game, if you want to challenge some preconceptions, and if you want to give players more avenues to tell their stories of their characters, then it's not a bad thing to take a deeper look at the ethics and morality of your setting and how you're portraying that, and how you want people to interact with it. It's as Vera said early on in the show, it's a lot about the tone, and keeping your tone consistent has to do with this. Session 0, communications, your number one tool. I feel like we're just restating all the bullet points, but yeah, that's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, it is all about consistency and setting expectations. You shouldn't switch up on your players aggressively unless they were warned about the extreme end early on, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with kind of sidestepping these things. Just you might want to do it in an intelligent way to ward off the natural hangups and things you can trip over, right?
And if your game has specific moral systems like alignments or humanity scores or things like that, I would say your best bet is to treat them as descriptive tools that support play, not as a rigid shackle or straitjacket to override a player's choice.
Yeah, I also know that I've seen some drama around DMs aggressively changing players' alignment following certain decisions. That can happen.
Yeah, Star Wars does this too, where in the various RPGs, there's usually a point in which the game master has to say, okay, you're now a dark side character.
Wow, cool.
No, for real, that is the thing. Has rarely come up, but I think because I tend to avoid playing games with Jedi in it most of the time, but I mean, your mileage may vary on that. But yeah, alignment is one of those issues. Light side, dark side in Star Wars is one of those issues. Humanity from Vampire the Masquerade is another example. What are some other? Do you know some moral mechanics that we have missed from other games?
What else with morality in it? I mean, I've played a lot of games that encourage moral decision making, but not that have trackers for it as such. I play a lot of little indie games, and they tend to not have that kind of structure.
Yeah, that's true. This is definitely more legacy role-playing games have this than anything else. Yeah, somebody did ask me about the Palladium alignment system earlier on in the show. Holy moly!
Well, Palladium alignment's cool. I like it a lot.
It's cool, but I find it even. We need to have a whole episode on alignment, but I find Palladium alignment to be almost more restrictive because they did define things a little more heavily on what this alignment means,
Well, but because it's a list of stuff, it for me, it's easier to create new ones that are equally descriptive. It's a similar family of thought to me to the tenets of gods in 4th edition. I feel as if it's providing you a useful structure for you, the intelligent homebrewer, to create an alignment that more accurately explains like what your character is about, and then stick to that. You know,
lawful stupid.
Yeah, that's me. That's me.
Oh. Yeah, so if you have enjoyed this discussion about Lorebeards and role-playing games and different ethics and things associated with role-playing games, please do us a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe button so that the algorithm can spread the adventure to even more players who don't know about our show. We would really appreciate it. We broadcast every Monday between 2 and 5 Mountain Time, and we will not be having a show next week, currently at the moment.
I believe that'll be the case. We're trying to schedule a couple of really cool guests afterward. Next, we'll put up a poll in the near future also, especially if we're not running next week, to decide some upcoming shows. Ooh.
I have to do polls for the Lorebeards 40K show today as well. So I'll try to remember to put up one for Lorebeards role playing. I think the only thing I would want to leave people with out of this is that playing the monster is a good way to think about like why a particular monster species is seen that way in your world. If you're at all like concerned that you may be falling into some of the traps we've brought out, like say the undead, make yourself a character. Decide what you would want to play that is from that particular group or that particular species or that particular faction, because oftentimes that'll give you a really good idea of where the boundaries are as far as what you're interested in portraying and what the setting says about that faction or group. Would you agree with that, Vera?
Oh yeah, one of my favorite characters was a Dampier spawn, like lesser noble from the Monowastes, who was running like a farm town outside of Geb, which was the like necromantic capital of the Galarian setting. And it was interesting to interrogate the morality of like the sort of trade that relies on like human chattel and undead minions, and using those structures to supply like vegetables to people in the desert who really need them.
Yeah, right. It changes your perspective. Here's another one for you that I think we've referenced anime a lot today, but I'm gonna throw out Overlord as an interesting example of right. Seeing from the monster's perspective.
Yeah, like I think Overlord is really intelligent. It allows for a lot of that internalism, and then it shows him interacting with like regular people and just pulping them, and it's like a whole thing. Oh my god. And they deserve it sometimes. Sometimes they don't, but that's the structure that he's part of. That's kind of his role.
Yep. Let's answer some questions from the chat here. We got another one from Ricardo Andres. Says, if your elf PC had a conversation with Morgoth, how surprised would you be if he actually gave you a gift of power? For people who don't know, Morgoth is the Satan equivalent in Lord of the Rings. He is the ultimate bad guy, is Morgoth.
I feel like surprised is inevitable. Whether you're terrified or stoked depends on the character, I think.
Okay, so the timeline, the time scale for elves in Lord of the Rings is very long. I imagine I would spend at least 100 years shocked and horrified. But after that first 100 years, I might try to find ways to use it against Morgoth. Whatever gift he gave me. I think I would eventually have that moment of acceptance, and then I would be like, okay, now how do I screw him over with this thing he gave me?
Try to be the undoing.
I mean, that's what I'm thinking. Here's another one from Pumpkin Historian. Would you like to read this one?
Yeah, question. How would you design your own alignment or morality compass mechanic? So there was a book I read as a young child called like Dungeons and Dragons and Philosophy that had an article on a related topic to this that left a strong impression on me, where like one of the axes was, I believe, a universalizability, which is also like an ethical concept, like where like actions are considered good morally if they can be reproduced by everybody. Like if everybody does it, if it's a good thing. or if everybody does it, it's a bad thing. So like lying is always bad in this system, because if everybody lied constantly, it'd be hard to get fucking anything done. There was another axis, but I've forgotten it. I feel like going to actual schools of morality would be more useful, as with adding more dimensions and creating some kind of like 3-dimensional nightmare.
Yeah, I see. So in Accursed, I have a mechanic based on whether you want to accept your curse or reject it. You accept the curse, you become more monstrous, more powerful, but also you gain stronger drawbacks. Like if you're a Dampier, which is a half vampire, if you embrace your curse and become more monstrous, you gain more of the problems that afflict a true vampire. Like, but if you reject the curse, you're giving up power in order to become more human, to reclaim your humanity. That is the axis that I designed for that specific game. Outside of that, I think maybe focusing more on your actions than your ideology, because I find that it's often less about what you believe and intend to do than what you actually do, right? Like your acts define you far more than your ideas do, I believe.
There's something to that. I quite enjoy that in a Dark Heresy, the new video game, that like some of your like internal thinking can affect the philosophy you embody for the Inquisition.
Nice. And there's so many philosophies in the Inquisition.
Yeah, they focus on only a scant few, but I think there's room for both. I do like the idea that it's your decisions that shape you too, but the process behind those has a lot to do with your actual like ethical system, right? Because like two people can do the same thing for very different reasons.
Right. I think it wasn't it one of the Batman films where he says, "It's what I do that defines me."
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Necroplayer, some may call me a woke romancer, soy bold, but I'm just passionate about cool creatures I can play that allow for great narrative difficulty. Wow. That is certainly some words.
Powerful, powerful.
Oh my god.
I do. There's something to this. Like the more monstrous certain species are, the more interesting it is to me to bring them forward into the game.
Well, you made a point earlier about like you like the idea of overcoming that narrative difficulty. You like the idea of the swobold, if you will.
Yeah.
Because they start out with that disadvantage. And I think that may be where Necroplayer may be coming from. He also loves kobolds, obviously, from his avatar. Now I want to make a subclass called Woke Romancer. I kind of want to see what that would look like.
I'm so curious.
All right. Well, that is just about all the time we've got today for this particular topic. Vera, anything you'd like to add, or anything you'd like to tell people and where to find you?
Yeah, just this is sort of the. It's an important question. There's a lot of ways to approach it. Being in tune with your players and being a decent creature is a good guideline, as with pretty much everything at the table. I have a Q&A coming up. I'm doing my second ever one. If you're curious to ask me stuff about like literally whatever, I'm going to run that on my Twitch channel at some point, probably next week or the week after. Here is the link to that on marshmallow.com if you're curious. I'd love to get some questions. Pretty much anything goes. The first one was like very focused on my creative work and like writing and things. This can include that, but can also be whatever the hell you want. So go ahead if you're curious. Please ask away.
Nice. That's a good opportunity to ask you. I would probably ask you a bunch of questions about like Twitch streaming, like how stuff that I'm already talking to you about, like how long I should go for and why.
Well, asking me things like that is okay also.
Great. Yeah,
I am still appreciation.
You can find me at twitch.tv/VRossWatson. I will be streaming Space Marine 2 tomorrow. And maybe Vera can raid into me. Who knows? We'll see how this goes. Yeah, if I stream long enough.
That is the trick. That is the trick.
I also am the co-host of Lorebeards 40K, which you can catch us on Wednesdays and Saturdays with that one. And that's about it. We need a sign off. We have yet to come up with a good sign off.
Lorebeards, roll, play out.
Yeah, I know. We're still working on it. Rolebeards. We did miss that. We did miss out on Rolebeards. That would have been really cool. All right, you guys have a good day.
Thanks so much, y'all. Have a good one.